Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. My name at this juncture is unimportant. I will likely reveal it at a later point in time, but for the meantime, John Smith will be a suitable alias. Before I reveal to you some of the files that I have archived, I will need to explain to you a bit more about myself and why I am doing this. Hopefully, this will grant you a bit better insight into myself. I am, for a lack of a better word, a sociopath. But unlike the ones with poor impulse control and self-destructive behavior, I had ingrained into me at a young age proper life skills by my father after he caught me standing over the fourth cat that I had killed. It was not out of malice, I doubt it was even curiosity, and I am not trying to make an awful pun. I just did it. He demanded to know the reason for my actions, and I explained that the cats had started to follow me, and I found it annoying. When I asked if I had done anything wrong, there was a shock in his eyes, as I have later come to realize. He explained to me that the cats that I had killed were beloved pets of other families who will want to know where they went. I didn't understand why this was so important, but his urgency in his voice made the impression that while I may not have cared, other people would. "Are they going to throw me in jail?" I asked, and he looked at me for a moment and said, "No, John, I won't, but I need to understand why you act this way, and I will teach you how to blend in with the rest of the world. Your actions could have dire consequences for your life if you do not maintain control, so I will teach you. It will be difficult, but the lessons are valuable." In short, he trained me like I was an army private. Strict timetable, strict punishment, constant drills into theoretical situations, but he was never aggressive. There were times when I could see the predatory mindset that he may not have been aware of and would try to push through, but he kept it in check. Being on military base most of my life, the discipline was familiar. Eventually, I would join the army and I did fairly well, and while I did not understand why others did, I was aware that they would have motivations. The rest of my life was, I believe, mundane. Nothing of significance really appears to mind, but then again, it is not like I have a good point of comparison. I was 8 years into my service, and I was acknowledged as a capable soldier who was dependable. And one night, during a night exercise in a country that I cannot speak of due to certain laws, my unit was performing reconnaissance. Potential intruder was sighted, and we were to verify the identity. 6 soldiers walked into the forest that night, and only I walked out. And it is the only truly definitive point in my recent years. Deep into the forest, we were in standard search formation. Jacob heard a crack of wood breaking and then signaled us to halt. As our eyes swept around to locate the source, a rushing being charged into outline and took kill. The scream was shortened by a loud crack, and his neck was broken. Tommy went to investigate, but was dragged into the woods before anyone could countermand his actions. "Open fire," I asked softly. "Negative. Our people might still be in there." Knives were drawn, and by that time, another soldier was dragged screaming into the woods. 3 soldiers left and the discipline was diminishing. "Fuck it," grumbled Erickson behind me. And as soon as the movement was heard, Erickson fired. We watched as the bullets hit the creature, but no wounds were visible. This tall, lanky creature slammed its fist onto Erickson's head with a crunch noise that I cannot describe, and I was grabbed and thrown to the side. My head smacked into the tree and I was dazed. I could barely hear gunfire and the growls that sounded more than bestial, if that makes sense. And shaking my head, I pushed myself upright. The gun was useless, and this being was far too quick and strong to be human. But it did not match any known animal that I am aware of at that point in time. Rustling could be heard around me for 3 very tense minutes. They seemed to lead deeper into the woods, and I was prepping to head in to verify the status of my men when I felt it stand behind me.
"Empty,"
it said. This pale creature looking into me with presumable sunken eyes revealing what looked like black eyes. The image of a piece of meat at the butcher's dangling by one of those large hooks immediately popped into my mind.
"Empty,"
it repeated, then it turned around and slipped away. I couldn't move or act. Distant noises indicated that it was walking away, but the pace seemed more deliberate, like it was dragging my men. I left the forest, heading back to the base, and after intense debriefing and threats of court-martial, I was allowed to remain an active soldier while undergoing therapy. Mental breakdown was the official diagnosis, while that unit was deemed MIA. They sent out 4 units to locate my old unit. 3 people returned, husked of who they once were, and when I got the chance to lock eyes, we nodded once. We knew. After my service, I left and I decided to further investigate the cryptid phenomenon. During this time, I would find the entity that killed my unit and several other soldiers. The Wendigo. My theory about the Wendigo's hunger isn't that it seeks human meat to survive, but humanity. The human soul is what it seeks. Knowing it lost it when it consumed human flesh, it considers that it might regain it the same way, not realizing that it is the act itself that will doom it to remain a Wendigo. No longer an active soldier, I researched the cryptids, but I went further than most enthusiasts. I spoke with another soldier who asked to remain nameless about the deep web and the best way to browse it. He explained to me the nature of some sites in the dark web, but I explained that I wasn't seeking that, but the back channels of the deep web. He gave me a copy of his custom browser, which he dubbed The Fly, because it was small and looked seemingly inconsequential. It could flit past the red rooms and then like to go deep. He explained the setup and then I thanked him. After I set up, I went into the dark side of the internet. I was testing the program out and it worked perfectly. A few red rooms were displaying their, entertainment, and I was able to slip past most of the admins. One was particularly aggressive in his actions, but the setup for this program made IP tracing a pointless endeavor. I don't fully understand the complexities, but I know that person and I trust their work. So, I plunged into the depths of the deep web, seeking government-declassified documents and the like, and I stumbled across a forum of coroners. And unlike other coroners, they didn't deal with murder, suicide, or mundane mysteries. Their victims were all cryptid or supernaturally related. I mentioned my interest in their jobs, and I explained I sought answers. The users were not happy with my presence, but when I explained my encounter with the Wendigo, they actually recognized me. Apparently, certain reports from psychiatrists can make it to them if certain words are used, and the doctor did not suspect subterfuge. They offered a deal. I archived some of their cases, and I would learn about what happened to my unit. They didn't seem to have a problem if I was to release most of the details to the public, but they warned that most people would not accept the surreality of the world. But if I could garner some interest, they would allow it as long as personal details were omitted. And I would come to understand why later on. But I agreed. Case 1. First of all, I would like to thank you all for your interest in my new vocation. As you can imagine, the case that I chose to disclose first was the one that I was personally involved in. I was not quite aware of the implications that would be brought to light in doing this, however. Having spoken with some of the morticians in the forum page, they asked that any name is to be withheld, locations were to be generalized, and make sure no government agency was aware of my action. I agreed, and they showed me the case of my unit. Case file: Wendigo/Milvet, number 0261. After consolidating the reports with the lone survivor of the event and the autopsies on the recovered military personnel bodies, the following is a fairly accurate recollection of the events. At 0016, the MIL unit was sent to investigate the reports of an intruder. This was a training exercise to judge the capabilities of lone survivor as a team leader. Approximately at 0039, the MIL unit had an auditory reconnaissance of Wendigo number 0183. Estimated identity of cryptid is John Sampson, a hunter who went missing around 1703. Recovered body Private Jacobs reported a branch snapping. The MIL unit halted and tried to locate the source of the sound. Around 0040, Wendigo number 0183 charged the unit and snatched Private Second Class Hill, snapping his neck. Private Tommy went to investigate but was grabbed by the claws of Wendigo number 0183 and his throat was slashed. Specialist Jameson was dragged under another bush. Claw marks indicate his death was slower as the lungs were punctured multiple times. Private Second Class Erickson was able to shoot Wendigo number 0183 when it charged the group again. As multiple previous cases have established, standard ammunition fails to leave a true impact on the body of a Wendigo. Further evidence that older Wendigo are virtually immune to small arms fire. Erickson was killed immediately when his skull was impacted from the top, severely misaligning two vertebrae, severing the spinal cord and crushing the throat vertically. A lone survivor was knocked aside. Estimate time duration for encounter with Wendigo number 0183 is 3 minutes. Acting Corporal Jenkins' body was never recovered. Of special note in this case is that this is one of the first times that the cryptid in question spoke in response to the presence of the survivor. The word empty is confusing, as Wendigo are traditionally voracious in their pursuit of human flesh. Autopsy summary: Erickson, Jacobs, Tommy, and Jameson. Erickson: fractured skull from overhead strike from cryptid, catastrophic damage to the neck and throat area due to the force of impact. Severing of the spinal cord implies death was instantaneous. Jacobs: multiple stab wounds from the claw of the cryptid. Secondary infection was not able to infect the body. Body was still cremated as per protocol, as was Tommy. Tommy: throat slashed by claws of the cryptid. Note, this is the same Tommy who witnessed the encounter of the police officer who encountered Skinwalker, Michigan Sub-Territory Number 4. Said police officer also reported on the mush corpse in the vehicle. The two deceased military personnel, names Helen Jenkins, were not recovered, likely taken as food by Wendigo number 0183. Judging by the enforced counseling sessions for the survivor, it seems unlikely he willingly caused the incident. Reading over the case file, I tried to figure out the implications of the things that caught my attention. Had these people really figured out who the Wendigo was? Or was it just guesswork? Had there been enough encounters for the filing system to be displayed in the way you saw it? I was aware Tommy was given the choice of enlistment or prison. It makes me wonder if the incident they refer to was the same case that caused him to make that decision. Why are skinwalkers designated by territories? Could it be that given their ability to shapeshift, make it impossible to identify who they originally were? The mush corpse is not a reference I am familiar with, and while I could imagine why it was called that way, the term mush seems overkill. But given the wealth of resources that I have access to, I chose to see what these morticians and their network have concluded regarding Wendigo. Wendigo is a humanoid cryptid, and while we have been unable to locate the first known Wendigo, we have concluded that the original story of these beings is more fact than fiction. Wendigo are humans who, after prolonged starvation, consumed human flesh, and in the process are cursed by something which causes their transformation. Their transformation is an approximate growth of limbs by 22%, and the fingernails elongate, sharpen, and harden to assist in catching more humans to consume. Why the Wendigo feel the need to consume human flesh is not readily apparent. It is speculated that it is the only meat that satiates their never-ending hunger. And after consuming human flesh of a sufficient quality, older Wendigo requiring more, they return to a place of significance for them and hibernate for years. Fire seems to be a bane to these creatures, as it makes holding off the younger ones a more viable tactic. However, Wendigo who are over 2 centuries old seem to ignore the heat of the flames and ignore it as a stalling tactic. Weaponizing it against Wendigo is the far superior option. However, most people when facing cryptids seem to leave their rational minds behind as they see something truly abhorrent to them and seldom take the time to mull through the problem. Given that Wendigo gain in strength and speed, is understood why humans rarely have the time to plan. Cases involving firearms were conflicting until it was deducted that younger Wendigo were vulnerable to small arms fire, until their body matured to resist caliber smaller than a .22. Very few encounters have involved active military personnel, so judging that firepower is difficult unless more encounters were had. Knives are an effective if foolish idea for Wendigos who are less than a century old, and their behavior indicates that they shun civilization. Reasons why are speculative. The information was illuminating. Hopefully, this will be of benefit to you all. If there are any other cryptids that you wish to know about, or maybe unusual deaths, please let me know and I will try to locate the appropriate case file. There were a few more votes for our Dogman case, so I have found one that I hope strikes something within you. This one is fairly recent from what I can tell. There is some footage from a fairly early commercially available nanny cam, but I have been asked not to upload that due to the hidden surveillance encryption which allows the alphabet agencies access at their discretion. Case file: Dogman/Civilian, number 0819. Initial victim is an autistic male of 9 years old, severe anxiety around strangers, communicative abilities restricted to barely legible writing in a large diary. Secondary victim is the child's mother, and father's whereabouts unknown, not important to this case. 3 weeks prior to the incident, she purchased an emotional support animal to see if it would alleviate her child's anxiety issues. Location is a lifestyle block in the state of Montana, and the land is family-owned and was in seldom use. Financial information was further obtained in the process of our investigations into the event, and it has been deemed inconsequential, but it has been recorded for the sake of necessity. The initial victim was content to be left alone, but according to the counseling adhered to by the mother, she felt that this would hamper the social development of her child. Records from these counseling sessions indicated that the counselor would explain that due to the levels of anxiety that the child exhibits in social situations, there would be little chance for future development. The counselor did gently coax the mother into acquiring an emotional support animal that the child might feel bonded to. Given the location where they lived, a dog was suggested. And according to the audio from the nanny cam footage, the bonding process was a success, with the initial victim showing some self-confidence, even looking his mother directly in the eyes. The dog was well trained and didn't react to extreme emotions exhibited in the lounge area. And 3 weeks later, the mother could be seen running into the lounge. The time was quite late judging by the lack of light outside the windows. Blood could be seen on her clothing, and judging by her wails and screams, the child was dead, mauled by some animal. Clutched tightly in her hand is the cordless phone for the house, and while the phone line was disconnected, the microphone still worked and the hard drive in the base was still recording. The mother was aware that the phone lines weren't working, and she could hear scraping movements upstairs. This was confirmed via the recordings acquired. She was then seen rushing to a window, and she looked out in shock, and after significant alterations of the video recording, a lupine humanoid cryptid, known commonly as a dogman, was seen skulking at the edge of the camera range. Presumably seeing this, the mother backed away and turned as a canine head peered around the corner, nearly hitting its head on the door frame, indicated that it was not of a standard height of any known dog breeds. It stalked into the room on its hind legs. The coloration looks like the emotional support animal previously mentioned, and parts of the fur seemed matted down, likely with blood. A third dogman also entered, but was on all fours, and judging by the gait, it seemed unsure of its pace. This could be attributed to the polished wooden floor. The secondary victim was frozen in fear as she saw the two cryptids. The attack was swift and coordinated. The one on all fours went low, while the one standing on went high. Her death was quick, and the third one joined the other two for the meal, after the standing one unlocked the door. They then walked to the door, opened it, then bounded off into the night. Police investigation came as a part of an initial missing persons report after the mother hadn't called her family. Police found their bodies and they opened a homicide investigation, and the case remains open. The bodies were diverted from the regular coroners to the ones affiliated with this forum. Autopsy. Initial victim: multiple bite marks to the arms and stomach area, scratch marks from a large paw evidence on the limbs, microtumors located within the brain which could indicate the autism and social anxiety problems. Secondary victim: bite wound on the ankle, severing an Achilles tendon, single bite mark to the throat, evidence that the stomach area was scourged. Missing organs include ovaries, kidneys, uterus, stomach, pancreas, liver, and 95% of the intestines. Secondary investigation: our primary one. Scouring the nanny cam footage shows in the weeks leading up to the attack, movement could be seen during the day of the emotional support animal, no anomalous movement detected. 5 days after the bonding, a dogman cryptid could be seen creeping up to the house. The emotional support animal stood up and walked over to the wall opposite of where the dogman crawled to. The emotional support animal stood there for several minutes until the dogman cryptid crept away. The initial victim just watched as his emotional support animal stood at the wall, while the initial victim is normally next to the emotional support animal at all times, even during sleep. The movement at the edge of the nannycam view resumed until the night of the attack. Movement in the peripheral showed 2 dogmen approach the house. One skulked at the edge of the light on all fours, and while the other ran to the side. Screams could be heard from a location suspected to be the child's bedroom, and soon, the mother could be seen entering the lounge in the state previously described. Several journals were taken as evidence in the initial investigation, and upon discovery of the contents within, they were switched with duplicates, with explicit mentions of dogs being removed. The mother made note of several minor incidents where her child would stand at the window and look into the forest. When she would ask if he would like to go for a walk in there, he refused violently. And as soon as she mentioned that they wouldn't be walking there, the child immediately stopped and hugged his mother. Judging by the descriptions in the following incidents, it appears to the same location the emotional support animal would stand when the dogman approached. The mother advised that while she did some basic yard work, that she always felt trepidation when she looked into the forest area. Like there was something watching her. She tried to muster the courage to go look for herself, but didn't want to risk leaving her child alone. The journals of the boy seemed nonsensical, but after multiple encounters with children on this kind of spectrum, certain clues were common among all of them. These journals were able to get upgraded in their standards of language. The initial victim was aware of the cryptid presence. When he would see the dogman standing outside his window, he would scream for his mother and cause the cryptid to flee. And this happened for about 2 years. One day, while he was walking around the backyard within view of his mother, he felt the dogman approach. Its claws snagged his shorts and started to drag him away, but his mother fortunately spotted her child disappear from view, and when she approached, the dogman ran, leaving the child behind. What people most find chilling is that the day the emotional support animal stood near the cryptid was referenced in the book of the initial victim. Doggy was wrong. Looked like doggy, but not doggy. Ma not know doggy wrong. Doggy looks at me like the bad thing at times. It is surmised that the emotional support animal was turned into a dogman through unknown means, as 3 dogmen were seen running from the house. The emotional support animal dogman was able to use his paw to turn the lock by hooking the key in between his toes, and the handle was easier to manage. Details on the cryptid, Dogman. Dogman is of a common cryptid type. the anthropomorphic animal, and while it doesn't have full human features, it is able to walk on hind legs for extended periods of time and display near-human intelligence, significantly weaker than the more supernatural Wendigo or Skinwalker. Regularly available firearms are enough to kill a dogman, and reports indicate that upon death, dogmen revert to their more base canine form. If there are any more cryptids that you would like to read about, please feel free to let me know down in the comments below. As previously mentioned, there have been requests for a case including the cryptid known colloquially as Bigfoot. This is an unusual cryptid in which the incidents involving are often just sightings of something big in the woods. But there have been journals from long-term hikers and campers who have had prolonged encounters with these cryptids. There is also one autopsy for a Bigfoot. The mortician who conducted the autopsy was inconsolable for months afterwards. He has recently returned to work, and he has also requested counseling until further notice. Case File: Bigfoot/Civilian, number 011. A weathered-looking journal was found on a picnic table in a large national park. For obvious reasons, the exact location will not be included. Park ranger retrieved the journal, and after trying to find out the identity of the owner, the subsequent report made it to us, where we retrieved the journal and also spoke with the park ranger. The park ranger agreed not to mention anything about this journal. The camper who wrote this journal had gone on a rediscovery adventure. They stated how they hadn't been connected to the outdoors for a period of 8 years and greatly missed the tranquility. Having gone on a sabbatical, they did the appropriate level of research for the area that they were going to. They had gotten equipment to replace old gear, and they did some training to keep fit for long hikes. They spoke with the park rangers and then left, and the details were removed from the relevant databases. The beginning of the journal is a descriptive journey, making mapping in the beginning quite easy. 2 weeks in is the first indication that there was something preternatural afoot. The sense of being watched and the occasional muffled snap of a branch being broken. This went on for around 6 days, and the person did not indicate any trepidation regarding these events. A couple of days after the sense of being watched stopped, the camper detailed an encounter with 2 very gruff-looking men. They had an almost feral look in their eyes, and their presence was intensely unsettling. Their communication was rough, almost punctuated with growls. Their leering gaze made the camper very uncomfortable, and as they took 1 step closer, they both stopped simultaneously. They looked around like kids caught with their hand in the cookie jar. A gasp escaped their lips, and they then bolted away. It wouldn't be until later that the camper would recognize the look and behavior. It was that of a startled prey. The writing is in cursive, and it had been fluent throughout the journal so far. The night of that encounter, the camper noted that instead of feeling refreshed like they normally had since their excursion, they felt mentally exhausted. Careful examination noted that the cursive was not as flowing. For the next week, the fluency of the cursive writing was deteriorating. A block letter was being used in place of it. Repeated mention of a recurring dream. The camper describes the ineffable urge to stand in the middle of the clearing next to a large silhouette of a humanoid. The dream would just consist of the 2 of them standing there for hours on end. And after the aforementioned week, the camper detailed the first proper encounter with a Bigfoot. or to be more precise, the Bigfoot from the dream. Exiting their tent to cook an evening meal, the camper noticed the presence immediately. A large humanoid, approximately 9 feet tall, stood half hidden behind a tree at the edge of the small clearing that the camper was camping in. But instead of fear, the camper felt a sense of serenity. The camper nodded to the Bigfoot and then cooked their meal. The camper had trouble putting into words what happened next because while he did engage in a form of communication due to the nature of how the conversation took place, putting it into words seemed difficult as 5 pages were filled with writing which was crossed out in multiple occasions. From what could be ascertained, the Bigfoot would telepathically impart the concept of something into the camper's mind, and for this instance, it was the concept of cooking, and not the description of it, but the concept. It seemed a little hazy, as if unsure. The camper then tried to explain vocally about the process of cooking one's food. But the Bigfoot reinforced the idea, and instead of cooking, the focus was on the process of cooking. It took a while, but it seemed that the Bigfoot was looking for an invitation to join the camper for the evening meal. The camper tried to form the image of the two of them sitting together to eat, which the Bigfoot took as the invitation it was meant to be. For around 10 days, this guest would be invited to join for the evening meal, and they would sit and eat. The meat would have to be cooler for the Bigfoot to enjoy properly. The writing was getting thicker, as if the hand writing the information down was heavier than normal. Since the likelihood of the camper gaining such a significant amount of mass to allow this event to occur, the mystery would remain unsolved until the end of the journal. After 10 days, the Bigfoot put forth the concept of community. The camper put forth a sense of city life while shaking his head. The Bigfoot frowned, then sent the concept again, but this time, the focus was on community in the forest with other Bigfoot. After a while, the camper agreed. The belongings were packed and the pair walked off into the woods. It wouldn't be until they got into the location that the Bigfoot was leading him to that the camper noticed that he was finally able to stand eye to eye with his large, quiet friend. 3 more journal entries followed, but the language was very broken English. It was like trying to describe through concepts in as few words as possible. The entry that the morticians found interesting was not the communal aspect of Bigfoot culture, but when the two saw those men, the concept of wrongness, imagined as a black fog with a large red cross in it surrounding those two. And then, an image of an endless corridor of trees like a hellish maze. Small food items like berries were used as the concept for a small amount of food near the bad men's feet with an early sunrise. It was agreed that the Bigfoot, due to their telepathic nature, could cause people to become lost in their forest through telepathic manipulation, and while not violent, did leave enough food for the 2 bad men so they would not die due to starvation. Case File: Bigfoot Autopsy. The Bigfoot in question was found dead in a national park somewhere within the US. Since the park ranger wanted to be vocal about this discovery, he was gaslit into alcoholism, which, given his family background, took little effort. The Bigfoot was 9.5 feet tall. His mass weighed at around 380 pounds. There was very little fat, and the mortician who conducted the autopsy noted that the hair was soft to touch and the skin was tough to cut through. Preliminary examination showed significant injuries to the torso and the arms. Scratch marks indicated a skin walker due to the variety of necrotizing fasciitis in the wounds. What was startling was that there were antibodies for the infections, preventing any decomposition. The musculature was incredibly dense, as was the bone structure. The killing blow seemed to be when the claws of the skinwalker penetrated the heart. There were no adrenal glands within the Bigfoot, nor were there any reproductive organs. But judging by the above-mentioned journal, it seems that these cryptids can infect others, but only the ones that they choose. I would state that Bigfoot are a higher form of cryptid, and while their communicative abilities are unique, they have shown to be capable of communicating with others, and their ability to show mercy when they could have easily killed those men indicates a higher level of communicative awareness. Mothman. Research in popular culture indicates that this winged cryptid is an omen, mainly connected with ill fortune. Correlations between alleged Mothman sightings and disasters seem to indicate this. There are not many cases involving the Mothman in these archives, mainly due to the fact that this deals with the dead people directly caused by cryptids or other unexplained events. Since the Mothman does not kill, this greatly reduces the amount of information that is able to be accrued. There are some journals of Mothman events scribed by those who have seen the cryptid. Case File Mothman/Civilian number 004. Journal of a 15-year-old girl. Most of the contents are that you would normally find inside a journal of a teenage girl who still kept up with this tradition. The entries of interest in regard to the Mothman are very few. The first entry describes a walk the girl took through a wooded area near her school. She notes how she is confident walking through the woods by herself due to her being athletic. She has also had several years of wilderness experience. The walk was supposed to be about 3 hours, but approximately 40 minutes into this walk, the girl spotted a dead deer with circular holes in the chest area. She looked around for any signs of a hunter, but this trail was a known walking area, so the chance of a hunter risking the death of an innocent person would be extremely unlikely in her purview. She stood up and continued on her way, and as she was bothered by a feeling that she could not describe, like a light buzzing in her mind, that kept her very vigilant. And after 10 minutes, the girl was brought to a halt when she saw a tall humanoid with wings glaring at her with red eyes. The sight of this monster caused the girl to bolt. The girl would make notes indicating that she was paranoid about this creature. And 2 months later, she would detail her second encounter. This one was more terrifying, as her paranoia had dwindled down slightly, until it landed by her bedroom window. Its glowing red eyes would peer into her room, and seeing this tall monster gaze at her brought her paranoia back. She screamed at it to leave, and when her parents came to investigate, they could not see any signs of the monster she described. This is when things took an unusual turn. When the girl was able to control herself long enough to conduct her own investigation, she noticed some large gouges in the wall and on several trees. She took photos with her cell phone, and her writing became significantly more manic. She would claim to see it more and more. It began to have a deteriorating effect on her sanity, and her parents pulled her from school due to the repeated screams that she would exhibit. Eventually, the girl would be placed into a mental institution, and her suicide occurred 5 years later. Secondary investigation. While some hallmarks of the encounter were similar to the other encounters, the secondary investigation brought to light some intriguing details. First of all, there were no records of a deer carcass found with holes in it along any walking trail. The closest thing was a dead squirrel, which had a singular circular hole in its neck. This was quite decomposed when found, but nothing else found matched the injuries as described. Obviously, the false sightings while she was in public were noted down, but the photos were what drew the attention of the investigators. Out of the 5 working the case, only one of them could see the apparent damage, but going by what the investigator described and what was noted in the journal were almost as conflicting as they were corroborating. The investigator was a known conspiracy theorist who was very fastidious in his investigations, while almost none of them bore fruit. The one leading to his current employment certainly did. This has led to speculation that the apparent correlation leading to the popular belief that Mothman is a harbinger of tragedy could be its ability to cause people to become obsessively paranoid and allow people to look for links that aren't actually there. The parallel theory it is called. 2 lines, one denoting tragedies and the other for Mothman sightings. Some dates would mix, but given the population density, the fact that technology is not infallible, and human error is also a leading factor, it could be explained that it is 2 lines of events not overlaying, but happening to share the same date some of the time. I am unsure of what to make of this myself, and while this sounds like it sort of debunks the Mothman, I think there is a little more to it than that. Imagine being able to turn some of the more observant enemies into a paranoid fool. That wouldn't be believed because the paranoid person no longer fully functions on the same societal norm. Their actions would discredit them, and they would be the boy who called wolf. And while they actually see the wolf, no one else can. It makes no sense to me. I am not sure if it makes any sense to you all, but this is one possible interpretation. The Mothman is an aerial scout unit who is able to disguise itself in paranoid illusions. A scout for who or what is yet to be determined. The second interpretation is that it could be weeding out those vulnerable to the rake. As a cryptid, the rake is able to have a more psychological draining effect on those who are unfortunate enough to encounter it, and the almost nihilistic viewpoints those people suffer could easily have been paranoid illusions instead. But this is just my interpretation of the cases that I have seen and transcribed. Not everyone will agree with me, and that is perfectly fine, but I think that there is a lot more to these cryptid entities and the unusual deaths that are not related to any logical chain of events. And I'm just not sure what that is yet. The rake is a cryptid, feared for the emotional impact it has on its victims. From the cases that I have read, the rake is related to the crawler and the fleshgate. All are pale humanoids whose primary method of locomotion is crawling, and while the crawler and the fleshgate seeking flesh to consume, the rake does not appear to, feeding off of the negative emotions that it can force from others was the main theory of its diet. The various autopsy reports indicate otherwise. Case file: Rake/Civilian, number 083-64. In the western United States, near 3 designated skinwalker territories and 7 suspected Bigfoot domains, a rake cryptid maneuvered its way to a small commune. This was a commune of 4 adults and 5 children. The point of this commune was the return to nature ideology. No cell phones except for an emergency satellite phone. Due to this, most of the information is from the victims themselves, journals and scribbled notes, that and the words the satellite phone was able to record. The commune was self-sufficient. The runners, as the people in charge dubbed themselves, as they were running the commune, were not the first people to notice the presence of the rake. Like a horror movie cliche, it was the youngest, a 4-year-old male. His journal had the word rake randomly dispersed in the writing for 2 weeks. The more alarming journal post was when the boy mentioned his scary friend, the rake, wanted to be let in. So, the boy let his scary friend in. This could have been dismissed as fake, but the eldest daughter wrote an evil thing was sitting on the end of her bed, watching her with hollow eyes. And every so often, it would breathe, but after what felt like hours, it left, and one word appeared in her mind: rake. This repeated for 4 days, but with each successive night, the rake would pour nihilistic thoughts into the eldest daughter. Depression was swift. Journal entries from the parents noted that their eldest daughter was withdrawn and would only mention one thing: the rake is here for us all. The youngest would exclaim that the rake was a friend, but when pressed into revealing his friend, the boy would mumble that it was shy. The eldest son, believing his younger sibling, decided to hunt for the rake. The uncle of the commune accompanied the eldest son. Their bodies wouldn't be recovered until the secondary investigation. Subsequent journal entries indicated that the voices of the 2 would-be hunters could be heard, but the youngest would block the door and say his scary friend was teasing the commune. When pressed for details, the youngest boy described his scary friend and how he would make him and his elder sister think thoughts of death. The rest of the commune tried to convince the boy, except for the remaining sibling. She would show the sketches that she had been drawing for months, sketches of a pale individual with very long black claws, voids for eyes, and gazing directly at the viewer with an intensity that should be impossible. The last journal entries of the commune, except for the youngest, expressed private concerns, as they all had those feelings of nihilism and of the inevitability of the rake. The youngest boy's last written words were, "I'm sorry." Autopsy 1. Eldest boy. Slashing mark to the calf muscles, cleaving the muscles in 2. Presence of adrenaline in the systems indicates that he was in a state of fight or flight. Femoral artery was pierced cleanly, and death was slow due to the smaller puncture wound in the femoral artery. Autopsy 2. Uncle. Deep lacerations to the chest. Wounds to the arms indicate defensive wounds. Autopsy 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Mother, father, middle child, boy, youngest son, eldest daughter, aunt, all found dead, sitting at the dining table. Post-mortem evidence indicates that the bodies were moved after death. Every person sitting at the table showed no outward signs of death. However, when the brain was examined, multiple scars were found throughout the brain, and all the scars were arced, as if in repeated bite marks. The missing child, the youngest daughter. Evidence strongly implicates the daughter as the one who moved the bodies of the family to the inside of the commune dining area. Her fingerprints matched 6 pictures placed in front of the appropriate victims on the table. Footsteps of the youngest led out of the commune and disappeared alongside the tracks of the rake. Rake information. The rake is an entity that feeds on induced nihilistic thoughts. People who are naturally nihilistic are immune to the enhancing effects that the rake naturally emits. This is thought to be an extension of the crawler sphere aura. The rake is a humanoid creature that moves on all fours like an animal. Long claws are seen from the forelegs. However, the evidence indicates that the length is a gauge. While the rake does have claws, as evidenced by the hundreds of bodies it has attacked, the length is quite short, but the length is likely to allow the rake to deduce how much nihilism or basic fear that the would-be victim produces. Due to the inherent nature of the rake, firearms have an indeterminable effect, as people are either too scared or too nihilistic to make an attempt. The rake, due to its feeding capabilities, will, when it finds a suitable host, torment the victim with night visits and the aforementioned aura of nihilism. There is a theory that the youngest daughter was taken not for food, but to make another rake. And while this is wholly speculation, it is the best theory that is agreed upon by the majority of morticians. As you can imagine, there were a lot of cases that I had to sort through, and after reading about nihilism aura that the rake apparently projects, I must admit, I do ponder what would happen if I would ever encounter this cryptid, or its variations. Also, finding out if these things can be killed would be helpful knowledge. I do apologize for the lateness of this case, but there were interruptions that required greater attention than normal. Werewolves, or the more encompassing term, therianthropes. Unlike the deplorable representation in the crimes against literature referred to as the Twilight Saga, or as I refer to it, why am I glad I have no emotional connections to people? From the vocal interjections, Teen Wolf would be a far greater viewpoint. Apparently, therianthropes are more like guardians than monsters, and some therianthropes can have their minds twisted by their capabilities. Therianthropy refers to the ability to turn into an animal through an unknown means. Werewolves are the more acknowledged example for this. But apparently, any strong enough connection to a spirit animal and training that differs from person to person, you can actually gain the ability to shapeshift. This shift is to a hybrid form of human and animal. But very rare, therianthropes can shift completely into the animal form, though these are more rare than an honest used car salesman. Before I continue, I will point out that the most morticians that granted me permission have asked that I only archive certain cases involving therianthropes and any victims, but they would rather this be more educational than threatening. I was able to point out that an example of a therianthrope who went blood mad, as they termed it, would be useful. They were not happy, but after several hours of heated discussion, they relented, grudgingly though, but only if I went into great detail about therianthropy and the differences to cryptids like skinwalkers. Like previously mentioned, therianthropy or shifting is different to the few other forms that other cryptids are able to replicate. The closest example is the skinwalker. However, due to the secrecy of Native American shamanistic rituals, we are unable to explain the ritual, and given the levels of stupidity and curiosity people can demonstrate, like Tide Pods, I wouldn't post that information anyway, even if I did possess it. For therianthropy, the training stages allows the shifter to adopt the things like the skin of the animals, the muscles and the speed, but the most tricky aspect is the mentality. Physical changes can be eased into to allow greater control, but the mental changes are the part where shifters can turn feral if the human mind doesn't gain dominance. One of these cases will be used as an example below. However, those who do make the shift successfully, they elect to use their powers to hunt the more dangerous cryptids and play guard duty for the bigger dangers. Though, while these therians were effective in cryptid combat, they couldn't fight them all. The rake has an especially destabilizing effect on therianthropes. The skinwalker trigger a truly hide and fight or flight response, and the fight would be to the death, typically the therian. The common therian forms are wolf, horse, boar, and bear, There are others, but I am asked to mention them only in the relevant case files. The case file that I have chosen, and had to defend my choice for, is one involving the last true werewolf. I have been asked to omit any dates, as there are still hunters out there who are trawling sites like this looking for clues to the Therian threat, and they are obsessed with killing Therians. Case file Werewolf/Therian number 001 Final. Journals and maps indicate the location of where the last true werewolf was eventually killed. The language is not English, but something I was able to get translated. Again, the language is not something I am allowed to disclose. We have been hunting him for the past 6 weeks. His aggressive nature is causing his trail to be easy, but we are patient. We know he is the last. The Inquisition, the Shadow One, has killed many werewolves and eliminated most of the more insidious vampires. But this lichen has proved to be a cunning predator, almost apex. He has avoided the small hamlets in the area. He must be hungry. This makes him even more dangerous. A predator that is hunted, hungry, and desperate. I do not expect any of us to live through this hunt, but his death is required. Therion 2 has informed us that we have found a lair. Tracks and recent kills indicate that it could be the lichens. We spread out and attune our senses to sharpen. There are 5 other Therians, including myself. Therion 4 is a bear shifter. She is looking at the mouth of the lair with an odd expression. Human. The Therian whispered. All our eyes snap at each other. This changes things. A hostage or a snack. Unless we move, the human is dead, and as the hunt leader, I walk into the clearing. I am a wolf shifter. There are 2 boar shifters, the bear shifter, and a horse shifter. The others follow me into the small clearing. The boars were twins, and they nod at me. We know our roles. The boars were to play bait. The horse shifter was a trained healer, and the bear shifter is the main powerhouse. As a wolf, I have an inherent understanding of team leadership. I howl, reaching that primal aspect, issuing a challenge. The others scatter to their positions, and I stand in front of the lair mouth. A growl that seems to shake the entire forest ripples from the lair. It stalked out with their strange strength, and I charged at it. I knew the response. It charged at me. The lichen leaped at me, but I slid along the ground as the boars charged in together, and their tusks barely broke its skin. From this point, the writing would change in style. The language was the same, but the writing is much shakier. It was apex. A lichen reached the pinnacle. We won't survive this fight. The bear charged in with a roar like a volcano, and the blows seemed to shake the very air around us all. The leader started darting in and out, snapping at the hamstrings and other weak points. The boars started to mirror their attacks, aiming from the same spot on the opposite side, if that makes sense. And the fight was the most brutal that I have ever seen. The lichen's claws easily ripped through our flesh, and the bear was greatly wounded, and the hunt leader was missing his throat, still clutched in the lichen's right hand. The surviving boar was being held up in the left hand, and its kicks were getting weaker. I move and I strike, and my kicks are powerful, and I reached out with a kick, and I slam into its throat. I can feel the windbox collapse beneath my hoof. He throws the boar away. A loud crack answers the question I dreaded. I start to dart aside, but with his last few breaths, he managed to slash against my stomach. Then he collapsed. I took the book from the leader, and I have documented the final fight. I am dying, but this needs to be recorded. I'm going to ask the human who is staring at us to get him to hand this journal into a sage. We fought well. I remember reading somewhere that the rate that herd animals are killed by predators in Africa is the same rate as the number of people who just completely disappear. Some of these are fodder for the dark web and the like. But what about the people who don't just disappear, but are known to die through tragic happenstance? Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 and other similar events. The Titanic is another one, and the dreaded Bermuda Triangle. As implied, I did spot some of the missing in the dark web. But what happened to the larger groups of people who die, but their bodies are almost unrecoverable? There is a bit more to their deaths, judging by the records that I have seen. Dragons are real, but since they cannot be controlled or weaponized by conventional means, placation seems to the on-hand tactic for dealing with them. And while there are not many in the world, as those details have been scrubbed from any specific mention, and given the complete radio silence from Russia and China, we would be unable to provide an exact number anyway. Every so often, a large group of people who vanish tragically. Flight 370 is a fairly public and recent event similar to what is described. 239 people, or as they have become viewed as portions of a meal. Every so often, a group of over 150 people would disappear, presumed to be dead. They are divvied up and prepared per the dragon's requirements. If the cooks are able to preserve some part of the body, it will be the only piece found for closure of the bereaved families. This has been going on for a while, decades at least, and as time goes on, the number of people that need to disappear increases, or the frequency in which groups vanishes. I am well aware of how this sounds. Then, I thought about it, especially for modern times, specifically mobile phones. Ever wonder why you're asked to turn them off when you're onto flights? They say it is so it doesn't mess up with the instruments. But if I was going to design an interconnected system to stay in control of an airborne vehicle that can be measured in the number of elephants, I would make sure that there is no way that the mobile home network in absolutely no way interferes with my systems. We have all seen the signal strength indicators on those devices. Why can't we just actively track mobile phones by signal strength? It obviously makes a connection with a tower or network, so it is plausible. All they would need in theory is to search for those missing phones along the network and use that to triangulate the location of the majority of them. Sure, water damage could affect, but they still had a connection before the damage. All it would take is the records of these events to narrow it down. Anyway, I know you're here for more than my observations. There is a journal of a dragon discoverer, and the autopsy of the said discoverer as well. Case file, Dragon, number 013. I've been traveling through the jungle for weeks now. I am reasonably certain that I am lost. However, I am not new to these expeditions, and I pay attention to the surroundings. I've also been here before, so I have that as an advantage. I heard a noise last night. Something is stalking me through this jungle, and I am going to set up my tent and write some more once I have a clue what's going on. Several days have passed, with a rough distance traveled in the direction. I have never experienced silence like this. The only sound I can hear is the scratching of pen on paper. I can barely hear myself breathe. When writers describe a sense of dread blanketing the area being described, I now fully appreciate, and I hate it. I can't focus. I should be 2 days away from the cave system that I am looking for. Though, when I think about it, I really don't want to go. 2 more days with notes pass. It hasn't killed me, but I don't know how much longer I can keep it entertained. I know the source of dread now, and seeing it, I almost wish the soul-crushing emotion. Dragons are real. I am staring at one right now. Dark scales cover this glamorous monster, at least 40 feet long, and it just lies there, bones all around it. When I enter the cave, I didn't even see it until it blocked the passage when I went to leave. When it speaks to me, it is excruciating, not in volume, just the raw power of its voice. He says that I am the first visitor in a long while. It spoke at me for hours? I'm not sure. My bones are still aching, and for all I know, it could be just minutes. But the pain is excruciating, and I have been bitten by a bullet ant before. Several sketches of the dragon are seen in the journal. I hear movement from the cave mouth. The dragon is awake and smiling. It is the most horrifying smile that I have seen. A large metal cage filled with corpses get pushed in. The journal ends here, and apparently, the morticians are part of a larger shadow community. It is through another aspect of the community that the journal was passed on. Curiously, it was not been destroyed. And when I asked the morticians why it wasn't destroyed, they reminded me that it is possible to follow the man's path. And there is an autopsy file of the explorer. Autopsy. Male, late 30s. Bone structure is riddled with microfractures. Skeletal structure was compromised, and the cause of death was a morphine overdose administered while the explorer was asleep. Apparently, dragons can cause microfractures to normal humans due to the intensity of their power, but the human with the LRP5 mutation with gain of function are able to resist the damage. However, since the known LRP5 mutations are of interest to the scientific community, the LRP5 ones who are not tracked are encouraged to assist the shadow community. And as a side note, an agent who wishes to speak with me has been knocking on my door for the past hour. I will speak with her momentarily, and I will update you depending on how the conversation progresses. I apologize for the delayed update, but the conversation with the agent that I previously mentioned had consequences that demanded an immediate response. While a certain government has been keeping abreast of my updates, they approached me solely due to my history, specifically Case 1. The base where I was last deployed to had been operating smoothly. Too smoothly for anything having to deal with a government or military bureaucracy. They asked, as gently as any secretive government agency concerned about the integrity of a military base on US soil, for me to accompany them on a base visit. We left immediately. The ride to the base was tense, judging by the very slight shifting of the 3 agents that I was accompanying. We got to a cheap motel an hour's drive from the base and booked in for the night. And while I was handed a uniform to change into, I pondered over some of the cases that I had read and not archived yet, when an epiphany occurred. What if the morticians and whoever else pondered about the cryptids were wrong about the relationship between the rake, the fleshgate, and the crawler? What if they weren't offshoots, but aggressive scouts? I am unsure for whom they are scouting, but this is just an alternate perspective based on facts. The rake and the flesh gate are reported to have some influence over the human mind. The rake is more psyops, and the flesh gate is more focused on infiltration tactics. The crawler would be a shock troop, focusing on the aspect of fear when people notice the truly inhuman speeds that they can actually exhibit. Taking this perspective into a real-world situation, the best way to know how to use your scouts effectively is to test them against people who are less observant to see who the scout and their targets will react. Remember, we are not dealing with humans spying on humans, but monsters spying on humans. Who would believe you if you say that you saw a monster watching you? You would be teased or ignored. Only the people who have also witnessed these monsters would believe you. And as a group, you would be disregarded or mocked. So, looking at the premise of this being regarded as a joke, let's push forward and go for execution. How would these invaders do just that? They could go for a small civilian population with the inherent capabilities they possess. They could, if they were methodical, take over very swiftly and easily. But all it would tell them is what they would already know. They can cause fear, paranoia, or despondency. But what about military personnel? Not the elite special forces, but the bread and butter of the armed forces. A small base of little consequence in the grand scheme of situations, a good testing ground, a petri dish of some sorts, like the base that I was deployed to for my promotion examinations. If this agency just wanted to grab me, I doubt I could stop them if they rushed me. Them wanting a dialogue that then progressed to our current situation could indicate that this totally insane theory had some basis. Looking over the uniform, I remember that event and the decisions I made, and something struck me as unusual. There isn't supposed to be a Wendigo that close to that base. It ranged almost 80 miles further away. Something is up, and I think the situation almost certainly ties in. An hour after I settled down into my room, the primary agent entered my room. The look on her face was an expression of concern. When I pressed for details, she mentioned that her team was acting strangely, like they were waiting for prompts in conversation. She asked to stay in the same room as she didn't trust the 3 agents in the other room. With my knowledge of the unit that I was traveling with, I agreed, and I volunteered to sleep on the couch. Naturally, I wasn't stupid to actually fall asleep. I came up with the 3 agents, the one in charge, and her 2 subordinates. We never met any additional staff. I had a plan, and I needed to work carefully. Since I was suspecting a mass infiltration of Fleshgate, I focused on the thoughts of returning to the base, and only on those thoughts. The night was long, and all 5 of us packed into the SUV and drove the rest of the way to the base. And as we were let in, I noticed the guard watch me intensely. Stepping out of the vehicle and walking around, we noticed that all of them were staring at me, until it was noticed by us. The layout hadn't changed, and I was asked how I wished to proceed. The agent in charge decided to speak with the base commander, and I sat in on the meeting. The base commander seemed to be in control, but there were small details that I keep noticing. Odd twitches, overlong glances, shifting uncomfortably. They were small, but I could see them. They offered a tour of the grounds, which was accepted by the agents, but I declined. When asked, I reminded them that I had already attended this base in the past, but would like to visit the spot of my old shame. An escort was offered, and I took the opportunity. During my time at the base, I had paid attention to the natural caves or overhangs in the area. Should I somehow not make it back in time during an overlong excursion? Well, I am not sure how Wendigo and Fleshgates would interact. I had a flash of inspiration. My escort was a 4-man squad who were behaving well, except for the sidelong glances that I would catch. As we got closer to the site of the incident, their pacing shifted slightly. They were getting ready to jump me. I tackled the soldier to the side, grabbing his combat knife while we ran. The other 3 opened fire, and fortunately, by the time they had started firing and the time I tackled their 4th, it was enough for me to get behind a tree. The knife went into the throat of the Fleshgate, stripping his weapons off of his body. I counterattacked and was able to eliminate the remaining 3 Fleshgates. Fleshgates bleed an off-pink color, and the consistency is thicker than blood. I removed from them their weaponry and some MREs just in case, and I looked around, trying to get my bearings, and I headed away from the base. It took me half an hour to find what I suspected: a dead Wendigo. I grabbed some poisonous mushrooms and I took them closer to base. I couldn't fight everyone there with standard weapons. They could scatter too easily. But we all need to eat, and hopefully they are susceptible to poison. As you can likely ascertain, they were. I will write up the details of the rest of the encounter and how the truth was kept hidden from the government, plus the various autopsies that would be conducted. And I also met a retired mortician. Sorry for the delay. This has been a difficult case file to finish writing up, mainly due to the repercussions of my actions. Like I previously mentioned, I was suspicious regarding the personnel on the base, and given what I found in the forest, I took precautions. Knowing the poisonous herbs and mushrooms in the area, I took a significant amount. The base personnel amount is wrong. There are likely to be more discrepancies, and I know that one of those agents is likely to be another Fleshgate. I have the tools to do what is required, but deployment will be difficult. I needed to affect as many people as I can, including the agents. I am the only person I know is not affected. I got little sleep, not that any reasonable individual would in this situation. Knowing some protocols, I was able to use the natural poisonous substances to infect the food and cooking utensils. And hours later, the infiltrators started to succumb to the poison. I figured it would be likely that I would be identified as the culprit. Fortunately, when I was based here, I would plot how I would assault in this base, positions to use for checkpoints, places to hide myself or supplies. And while the army personnel do not carry normally, the agents would be required to arm myself. The agent who brought me here figured me out. I acted, slamming her against the wall and my hand over her mouth, and fought her for her weapon. 2 discharges went wild during the struggle, and I was able to wrest control. 1 to the guy, and 1 to the head. Blood poured from the wounds, and I grabbed her spare clip and her cell phone, tossing the cell phone to the side once I left the building, and I went on the assault. It took me 2 hours to kill everyone, and I received a total of 5 gunshots. Ignoring the pain, I noticed that not all bodies bled red. About 65% of the bodies seemed to slightly deflate upon death, and the liquid they leaked was not red, but a light pink color. It also didn't look like blood. The consistency was slightly thicker, like the mustard. When I was searching the commander's office, who was a Fleshgate, I created a throwaway email account and emailed the mortician contact. I sent them the direct dial number for the office only. And 8 seconds later, the phone rang. I told them about the fleshgate infiltration into this space. I explained my actions to them, and they advised that they would send a retired mortician to attend the site. And while they never dealt with autopsies anymore, they stayed within the organization. So I waited. Part of me wanted to move the bodies to make corpse retrieval easier, but the practical side of me said that they would likely be upset with me disturbing the evidence. Sitting in the commander's office, the wait was long. I wanted to focus on how to identify fleshgates, but it would require resources that I don't have access to. And I also had no major inclination to look too deeply into it. I appreciated my archivist duties. While being active would be appreciated, I would rather just archive. The retired mortician arrived in a large truck. 3 people piled out of the back, and I met them at the gate. As they approached on foot, I pulled out a knife, and I explained that some of the corpses were fleshgates and bled a different color. I cut myself slightly and bled. The others complied with the request and showed the same color. I was mentally projecting an off-green color, but it seems these were humans. I walked the mortician through the assault on the base, and I explained about the cryptid corpse in the woods. The retired mortician thanked me for the details when I spotted his name tag. I confirmed that this was the mortician that retired after a mush corpse. His face paled significantly at the mere mention of that incident, and he politely advised that I do not mention that event again. Pointedly would be a more apt way to describe it. The bodies were placed into the truck and we all piled in. The ride back was quiet. The one thing I did not was the haunted look that Will shared. Everyone here had a personal encounter with a cryptid. It took me a while to recover sufficiently from my injuries, and while that transpired, the autopsies were conducted. Instead of doing a breakdown of each individual one, I will convey the pertinent details. Autopsy. Humans. Poison from the death cap mushroom ingested, likely cause of death. The ones who survived the initial poison were shot multiple times with a bullet to the head post-mortem. This actually caused some trouble for the attending morticians, as there seemed to be discrepancies in the parts of the brain governing memory and perception. The damage makes it hard to verify if all suffered the same level of inflammation, triggering what could be attributed to the false memories. Fleshgates. Humanoid with a similar skeletal structure made of hardened cartilage in an approximate facsimile of the human skeleton. Upon death, the cartilage softens, given the slightly deflated appearances as noted by the acid who eliminated the nest of the infiltrators. The musculature also seems to have a more fluid quality, allowing the fleshgates to alter their forms to better reflect upon the false memories they impart. The brain has extra sections, which are theorized to affect others, allowing false memories to allow for easier infiltration. Extra glands are filled with a pheromone, which allow for weakening of the immune system, allowing the telepathic manipulations to occur more easily within the victims. Wendigo. Cryptid. Elongated humanoid. Deterioration of the vocal cords and the speech part of the brain indicates that the natural vocabulary is greatly diminished. The state of this part of the brain is equivalent to that of a baby learning to speak, copying sounds here with no understanding of context. The skin was thickened to deal with the lower temperatures that they are readily exposed, which also helps act as a natural form of body armor. The musculature is approximately 8 times greater than a human's. which also helps with body toughness. Claws are hardened nails to levels thought impossible. The Wendigo was beaten to death, which, given the resilience this particular specimen demonstrated, speaks greatly of the effectiveness of flesh gates. This is the third infiltration attempt in the past 60 years. There were 4 experiments regarding the Ouija board from what I have seen. 3 of these cases showed no significant supernatural events other than flickering of an entity. The 4th and final one demanded the cessation of these trials once they recovered all the parts that they could find. Experiment Ouija number 04 Final. 3 couples had been manipulated into performing on an Ouija board inside an abandoned home that had been fitted with surveillance cameras and microphones. 2 of these couples were not strong believers in the supernatural, not completely closed-minded, however. The primary couple were religious, but not aggressively so. They brought an Ouija board from their home and chatted casually while setting up the board in planchette. The second and tertiary couples were not thrilled when they saw the board itself, but complied with the urging to partake. Customary opening rituals were performed with what is believed to be a prayer. The audio did not reflect this. All that could be heard was screaming and begging for mercy for several minutes while the 3 couples just sat there praying. As they finished, the screaming stopped, and they asked the opening question. The only camera that didn't immediately turn to static was the one in the living room, where the Ouija board was set up. When I reviewed the tapes for archiving, I determined it to be smoke, not static, and not sure how we got different observations regarding this. As the question started properly, there would be movement in the static or smoke, humanoid at times and not at other times. The noises made from those locations resembled growling, not bestial, more primal. The only properly functioning camera revealed a 7th entity within that room. A tall humanoid with black skin and warped legs. It wasn't looking at the couples, but directly into the camera. The primary couple were a bit more energetic than the other 2 couples for undiscernible reasons. The microphone in that area wasn't transmitting the conversation, even though it was working up until the completion of the opening question. The notes from the researcher spearheading this indicated that he could hear the couples talking just fine. They were trying to contact the spirit of a deceased grandmother of the male of the tertiary couple. Names would be given, but the remains were not identified, just matched to what was left. 3 minutes of questions later, the primary male glanced at a mirror and noticed the humanoid staring at them via the reflection. He went to yell, but wasn't able to make sound. The others glanced at him oddly. Then a voice came from the primary male, impossibly deep, and the voice demanded they resume the experiment. This was underlined in the notes as well. When someone would attempt to question, the humanoid would raise a hand and scratch the air, but wounds would appear on the interjector. The voice would demand they resume. The face of the entity would flinch, like something not used to a facial structure would try to emulate a smile they saw someone else do from a great distance. The question became intensely personal, and going by the investigation conducted by the organization, the answers given were false. The questions were for those of a perverted sense of morality. The answers would be dragged out by the planchette, and while the other 5 would vainly attempt to remove themselves. The entity's body started to flinch in what would be approximated as laughter. The notes for the experiment stopped abruptly during an observation that some aberration was making their way down the hall. It is here. And it is happy at me. And those are the last lines from the case file. The footage goes black. There would be a 2-day pause. Then the head researcher who was personally overseeing the experiment would be located in a remote Danish bed and breakfast, and parts of the 6 volunteers would be discovered in the bed. When the matter was brought to the attention of the local police, the organization were able to take control over the case and subsequent investigations. The room was covered in uncoagulated blood and fecal matter. Phrases in a language thought to be Latin were seen, but the translator team were unable to translate. They tried the rest of the global human lexicon with no success, and the translation team would complain of seeing a writhing humanoid form haunting them 3 days before they commit impossible suicides. One was found hanging by a spider web. One had shot themselves in the head with no gun. Residue or casing, just a hole that matched a .38 caliber bullet with no indication of significant velocity, just trace amounts of unignited gunpowder. The other swallowed medicinal pills not even available for commercial release for another 3 years as the chemical formula was still being worked on. 3 left feet, 5 right feet, 2 right hands, 4 left hands, all missing fingers, 4 1/3 of a torso, 3.5 pairs of legs, 6 sets of teeth, 4 skulls, all disembodied pre-mortem. The aforementioned body parts were found in the same bed as the head researcher who woke up to the sight and screamed. The DNA were able to match up what was found to the missing couples, and semen was found on various pieces that matched the head researcher. The head researcher states that after everything went black on the screens, the entity abducted him and forced him to endure torture for a period of time that he has no words to describe other than hellish. He stated he could see the couples were suffering lesser forms of torture, but the entities inflicting the pain and agony highlighted that the head researcher was to blame, as he wanted to see if demons and hell were real. Autopsies of the parts recovered show multiple fractures in the skeletal structure, tearing of muscles. Torsos had the traditional Y-cut of an autopsy. However, the scarring indicates that the wounds healed multiple times. The head researcher refuses to fall asleep, saying that he sees them when he closes his eyes. Whether he is referring to the demons or the people whose torture he caused, he will refuse to clarify, and the head researcher also shows the same autopsy scarring. No further research is planned regarding the Ouija board, and I have asked the morticians that if they hear anyone moronic enough to try another experiment, to notify me immediately so I can kill them. I am sorry for the delays in posting this case files, but it turns out, since my efforts regarding the infiltrated military base, I will be doing some fieldwork with a retired mortician. So, we are to head to Scandinavia in the next couple of days. The mortician and I have returned from our excursion to Scandinavia. It was enlightening. We flew to Oslo first. The airport was busy as you could imagine, but the mortician and I were fairly silent during the flight, except answering the questions asked by the air host. Our luggage for this leg was fairly light, only a few days of clothes and toiletries, and the mortician didn't understand why I didn't want us to take cold weather and hiking gear from the US. I pointed out the climatic and geographical differences for the areas that we would be hiking through, compared to the majority of the United States. In Norway and other regions of the Scandinavian area, the gear would be better suited for their climate and terrain. So, Buying it from there would be a wiser choice. We dropped our luggage off at the hotel and then we went shopping. We got boots, jackets, and a couple of tents and other hiking utensils. We also got a couple of larger suitcases to help us cart our new gear as we got closer to our next phase of this journey. One long bus trip to a place name that we mangled in our pronunciation later. We had been in Norway for a couple of days now. During this bus journey, there was an odd sensation. Like I'm walking through a garden and the owners are very keen of my presence. It is a very weighty sensation. We headed to our new hotel for a couple of days and we looked into the local legends of the small town that we were in. Nothing overly promising, but I did voice the experience that I had on this journey. We asked around and got the, look at these funny American tourists reaction from most of the people of the town. The mortician and I had instructions to follow. The task of trying to locate any trolls in the Scandinavian area. And given my military background and the funds the mortician was working with, we would be able to navigate the wilderness fairly well, and the local populace mentioned some of the more dangerous plants in the area. We packed up and headed off, making sure to tell the local police station that we were planning on a week-long hike. Not much happened on the first day, but it was on the second day when we both felt that judgmental gaze upon us. Mid-morning on the third day, we found a large rock covered with moss. I remember the initial research that I did on these cryptids and their belief behavioral patterns. There was what looked to be a part of a wall below the rock. Scandinavian trolls were believed to have thrown rocks at churches. I looked around and I saw that the hillside seemed a little odd. I approached carefully and the mortician watched warily.
"Hello, man,"
a voice grated. Have you ever bitten a metal fork and you get that awkward sensation of metal on teeth? That's what the voice sounds like, but for the entire skeleton. The mortician approached.
"Truth seeker,"
the voice stated.
"Why are you two here?"
I could see a set of eyes staring out from the hillside, watching us with a timeless gaze. There was an actual troll. It appears to be sitting down, so I cannot give an accurate observation regarding its size. But from its huddled position, it was at least 4 stories high. "We seek to know more about you," the mortician called out. The troll focused his gaze and spoke.
"How many pulpmen?"
"I know of 3, I answer. The mortician grips my shoulder with surprising tightness and adds, 12 more that we know of."
"And those out of time?"
The troll was more insistent on this question. I started to answer, stating that I wasn't sure of what he means, when the mortician spoke up. 20. 8 were pulpmen. The troll nodded and closed his eyes.
"We resume slumber. Our watch will start soon,"
he grated. Day was slipping away, and we would need to camp soon, so we set up our camp and I waited for the mortician to speak. Very rarely, one of the corpses we get is for someone not in our time period, never from the future, always from the past. Sometimes, these are also pulpmen, as the trolls call them. He explained formally. I shake my head at the thought of the pulpmen, not cryptids in the traditional sense, just people who died repeatedly under so many causes of death that it was literally impossible to determine the cause. The accumulated injuries turned the skeleton, muscles, and organs into pulp. And the autopsies are messy affairs. We ate some MREs and extinguished our very small fire, and then we turned in for the night. Well, some of it anyway. Crashing was the only warning we got. Something very big was charging through. Elephant or rhino size, and I clambered out of my tent and I saw a very tall humanoid running right at me.
"Hollow man,"
It declared. The mortician was making his way out of this tent when I ran. "Grab your shit and leave Norway!" I shouted as I ran past. The thudding of the being behind me was like the bass of a vehicle cranked to obscene levels. I didn't run out of fear per se. I just knew that this thing wanted to kill or eat me. Running lengthened my life expectancy in strides. Running through a Norwegian forest, being chased by something that would dwarf an elephant, and knowing it wants to eat you just for existing, is an experience that I never wish to repeat. The only slightly saving grace for me, as the odd hour slide seems to have in this part of the northern hemisphere. I could barely make out the roots, thick bushes and fallen branches. I used prey tactics to survive. I took sharp turns up to 90 degrees, and I ran closer through very thick parts of the forest. This forced the thing to slow down. Well, a little bit. I made it to a large open area after emerging from the forest, and I ran a bit ahead and turned to face this thing. "Why do you seek to kill me?" I yelled. The thing slowed to a stop. It was a tall, bulky-looking human with bulbous facial features, except for the eyes, which were set in quite deep into its face.
"Hollow man will end world with broken time. Eat Hollow man, world will live,"
it growled. "Would all trolls know this?" I asked.
"Hollow man should stop talk."
"I spoke with the troll yesterday. He didn't kill me. I might not be the hollow man that will break time. I write about strange things in the world."
"Gods and followers?"
it asked, stuttering slightly. "No. Dogman, skinwalkers, Wendigo, pulpman demons, the things that live in this world that the world try to ignore or hide from. Time is not my concern. Strange creatures are," I state.
"Dogman, not natural. Troll talk,"
it said, turning back the way it came.
"I talk troll. Hollow man can leave. But if I see you again, I eat you,"
it says, as it straightens itself up and walks the way we ran from. I watched it walk away before walking away myself, and as I did, I pondered what I knew about these cryptids, trolls and ogres. I am of the view that the being that chased me was a Norwegian troll, known for consuming the flesh of those of the Christian faith. I consider these to be ogres, powerful creatures but not overly bright. They grow or consume enough to grow into trolls. Trolls have a greater purpose in the view of our world, but I just have no idea what it could be. While there are some known cryptids in the water, either in the depths of the ocean or the relative shallows of inland lakes and rivers, they are more likely to submerge rather than cause acts of violence that would bring the attention of the morticians to their activities. But there is a cryptid that is closely tied to the waters. There have been sightings of these creatures, though not as many as the large case files that I have to document. They are referred to as the Montauk Monster, and are reported as a hairless sloth, and it turns out that there is more to these creatures that the mainstream media do not wish to report. And while I may find it unusual, those with an emotional range greater than Edward Cullen in those movies may find it very disconcerting. Case File: Cryptid, Aquatic, Montauk, number 0386. The location of this body is near the city of Seattle, Washington, in the United States of America. The body was recovered at 0310 on April 10 of 1970. The body was washed ashore and spotted by a passerby. The desk sergeant who got the call was an informant for the morticians, who after hearing about another Montauk, notified them immediately. The body was examined and the results were noted down. Autopsy. The cause of death was suffocation. The biology, as noted in the other Montauk autopsies, not that the creature was adapted to aquatic life as evidenced by the gills on the side of the neck and then beneath the armpits. The skin is soft and the evidence of scale molting is detectable around the hands and feet. The brain is shown to have regressed from the original human body. The skeletal structure is a misnomer, as the skeleton is more elongated cartilage, and the musculature of the spine has been redesigned to allow a hands-free swimming form of locomotion. Speculation on the Montauks, as this is all theoretical and conjecture. There has been no case of a living Montauk being captured to prove or deny these theories. It is believed that very, very rare individuals who have been involved in a crash involving vehicles and deep waters that they go an emergency evolution or de-evolution. These highly unique individuals are theoretical, as the DNA of the Montauks and regular humans is different in some key areas. However, DNA tracing shows similarities to certain bloodlines around the world. However, the rest is mixed with the fish DNA, which takes into account the gills and the scales. Why Montauks beach themselves like whales is a mystery, though it is believed that a dormant part of the mind that has access to memories of being on land, they try to replicate that and then suffocate. Though, the groupings of these creatures have been brought to repeat attention. Panama, Japan, Australia, theoretically, and the coastlines of the US seem to be the major points of these creatures, but the reasons are not readily apparent. Given the history of these creatures, it is unlikely that they are in any way related to the military dogman experiments. The forced combination of fish and human DNA would not be readily viable. A dolphin would theoretically be better, but we are not here to correct the scientific experiments of those with no moral compass, just to document the strange creatures of this world and any corpses that they either make or leave behind. As I read over the case files of these Montauk creatures, I am surprised at the lack of theory regarding the mythical city of Atlantis as a viable possibility. But there might be something in these case files regarding this. The retired mortician has popped in to see me a few times since we made it back from our encounter with the troll and ogre. He has never autopsied a Montauk, observing that if he had, then maybe the mush corpse wouldn't have affected him so badly. His skin pales again at the thought of his last autopsy he performed, but he doesn't vomit, which is a progress. I am curious about these Montauk creatures, if the theory is true that they are truly rare humans who can do a rapid form of evolution. I ponder whether it is a step forwards or backwards for evolution in human beings. The former mortician has asked if I would be willing to accompany him on further excursions, or even actual cryptid hunts, for the more dangerous ones out there. I stated in explicit terms that I would not hunt a skinwalker without significant firepower or greater knowledge of them. And that was when the mortician showed me files that I had pushed aside in favor of the more intriguing cryptids. We noted that all other cryptids seemed to abandon areas where mush corpses were recovered for months. And as I have repeated that these mush corpses in the past, I will give you a very brief overview. Mush corpses are humans who have, well, thanks to modern technology and the ability to record audio, have apparently been subjected to hundreds of deaths in a perverse Groundhog Day loop. And then, after whatever causes them to suffer deaths that are literally impossible, the body would be found in a public area to be recovered. However, the overwhelming trauma has reduced everything that is not skin into mush, and this isn't visually detectable. Only tactile inspections reveal the horrifying discovery. It is of little wonder why these discoveries force morticians to quit, and apparently swear off soft foods altogether. Even the ambulance drivers who have to transport the body quit immediately after the delivery of the body. At first, it was assumed that the deaths were caused by some unknown organism. However, due to the aforementioned commercial flooding of portable recording technology, you can listen to every single death that the victim has endured. They seem to be unaware of their fate unless they can see the cause. The one thing that really makes this body so upsetting is that the skin is completely unharmed. Apparently, cleaning up after yet another attempted autopsy on these bodies is almost as bad as the autopsy attempt itself. While I was perusing the case files in regards to coastline accounts to get more information on the water-based cryptids, I found an unsettling account that, while not at all related, makes me of all people feel uncomfortable. This town was not based on the coastline, but it was within 50 miles. The original population was 263 before the event. The name has been scrubbed thoroughly from any historical records that I have access to, which, given the Mortician Network and their affiliates networks, I can't find it anywhere. And while the Morticians mainly deal with corpses of or made by cryptids, this was an isolated incident until I found 6 other towns who also suffer the same disconcerting fates. No known pattern, country, or any motive could be discerned. Case file: Incident Candyland, Town 01. In the year 1873, there was a town whose name is no longer recorded who went silent. The neighboring communities investigated this unusual activity and at first found nobody walking around the town. A deputy who had made the trip decided to investigate further. He entered a small saloon and he submitted his investigation in the report below. I came to, redacted, after Mr. Sampson reported that the farmers hadn't sent their shipment of oats. The sheriff sent me to investigate. Traveling wasn't really too bad as it was a place that I have been to from time to time. But as I drew closer, my stomach started to churn uncomfortably. Pressing on as I trotted into the main town hall area, I felt something very bad had happened. I had seen no children, no farmers, nobody. It was a ghost town. A ghost town won't haunt me like what I saw in the saloon. Entering the saloon, I saw 3 people sitting around a table and in the middle of a game of cards, and the barkeep was behind the bar. But the first thing that tipped me off was the air smelled sickly sweet. None of them were moving, and I walked towards the card players, but they never reacted to me. I called out to them, but they were like dummies, and the sweet smell got stronger. I grabbed the shoulder of one of them and it felt wrong. The arm didn't feel right. I backed off and I swore. And I looked closer. And the skin looked wrong. My guts were telling me to run, but I didn't want to think what the sheriff would call me. I headed to the barkeep and he was just stood there. And he never moved. That smell came again, not as strong than the others, but it was still there. And when I looked at the barkeep, I saw something very wrong. His eyes, they were gone. No blood, and it looked like hard candy. So I ran, and I forgot my damn horse until I made it to the sheriff's office back home. The sheriff and the doctor arrived to investigate, and they found that all 263 inhabitants had undergone the same effect. The sheriff left the doctor to work, and he autopsied all of the people. Give the near identical results, only differing in volume due to body size, and the components of what the bodies were turned into will be listed below. The skin is tougher, similar to leather. There have been no damage to the skin other than the fact that it had been treated to make it tougher. The fatty tissue underneath is cooking fat that was cold and slightly solid. Muscle tissue had become candy floss, and cartilage is replaced with taffy. And the bones are dried sugar compacted into the skeletal form. The lungs also appear to be a form of taffy as well. And the organs below where the diaphragm would be is a meaty stew. And the brain is caramelized popcorn. Over 250 people, all ages affected, and nobody can figure out why. The doctor, after conducting the autopsies, quit, and according to reports, left town whenever a traveling carnival arrived. Apart from the fact that the bodies were still recognizably human, given the transformation composition, there were no ambient sounds other than the wind. There were no flies, crickets, bees, wasps, or any other loud insect. No birds sang, no dogs or cats, just silence. The animals that were on the farms were missing. This was deeply unsettling to read, but while this village was in the United States, there have been 3 small townships in the Europe area, one in Great Britain, one in Germany, and the other in Romania. Russia even admitted it happened to one of their own townships, but that is all they will officially say regarding this event. The 6th was actually in China, but again, the reports are as detailed as the opposition ballot to Vladimir Putin. And while there are other traveling carnivals or circuses who have unusual effects, this one, as far as I have read, is the most disturbing. Having tracked the majority of the carnivals at that time via very old newspaper clippings and journal entries that could be retrieved, it is literally impossible for this carnival to exist, except that it has struck 6 times that we know of, and this is all we know. The last report was a little over 40 years ago, and as much as the technology boon has dampened people's interest in going to the circus or a carnival, but some older traditions are showing a resurgence. God forbid that this happen again, especially to a larger population center. The morticians seem to find this event reoccurring unlikely, and I do suspect that they may be right. I just wish that I had more time to read over the military experiment files regarding the dogmen. That might make for easier reading, and there are so many other files for me to come through. Maybe I will read about a ghoul or something. Something to ease my mind would be highly appreciated. Fortunately for the person who named this incident, is they were already dead. If they weren't, they would be very shortly. In truth, while I heard of the Jersey Devil as an urban legend, I never figured it out to be much more than a flicker out of the corner of someone's eye, or maybe a branch snapping in the woods. And while I was always aware that this job would show me things that I would not be ready to comprehend, I always thought that the presence of trolls and ogres would be most extreme. But then, I started looking into the Jersey Devil. For those who have either started reading these case files now or have asked for this particular cryptid to be archived, I will go over a brief rundown of this particular cryptid. The Jersey Devil is typically noted to be seen around southern New Jersey, hence the name, and it is a small creature about 3 to 4 feet tall. It has a goat-shaped head, hooves, and small forearms and leathery wings. One of the more reported features is its inhuman shrieking noise, and it is also purported to be very fast. And while there have been no confirmed deaths caused by this cryptid, observations by agents of the Morticians noted that the area that is said to be the domain of this cryptid is given a very wide berth by the other cryptids. I don't blame them. I would rather get in an ass-kicking contest with an ogre than encounter this thing again. There were reports of animal corpses that suffered wounds not usually associated with any fatal injuries. Since there were no verified witnesses of these attacks, it was assumed to be inflicted by a naturally occurring creature. Having seen monsters that could and would kill me, should they choose to, this seemed a harmless investigation to go through. So, I packed for a night hike as I wasn't planning on staying in its territory too long. The drive to the area was long, and on arrival, I checked in at my motel and I started on my hike. I had several days worth of food and had some research on local non-poisonous and non-toxic flora in the area. It was careful work getting off the beaten track, and I have found a meager area to set up as a camp. As I set my pack down, I felt a presence. It was enormous, like an extra weight trying to smother me. Whatever is capable of exuding this level of intensity was not a weak creature. Spinning around, I saw it, standing in the open and grinning at me. 3.5 feet tall, light brown fur. It held its belly and laughed. Well, that was the sensation it seemed to be emulating, but the sheer volume was like Barry White, chuckling like Santa Claus, and it had a level of menace that not even the ogre exhibited. It raced past me and was gone by the time that I turned around, and I just stood there shaking. It wasn't adrenaline exactly, it was fear. It is very rare for sociopaths to actually experience a strong enough emotion to generate an honest response. Fear was a common aspect when one did a combat tour, but that was muted. But compared to the sheer dread that I felt when this cryptid laughed at me, it's like comparing the alcohol content of light beer and absinthe. Soon, the fear subsided, and I felt the obligation to stay out for one night. It was fast, and it had a laugh that I will always dread hearing again. But there wasn't much else I knew about it. I set up my tent, prepped a campfire, and I waited for a while. And as I watched, it appeared in my little camp area, with its menacing grin still on its face. Then I felt the pressure. I have rarely had the displeasure of enduring a migraine, but this pressure within my skull was brutal. It just stared into me. Its focus was on my mind, and I could actually feel images form in my mind. It was disjointed, like a cutscene in a horror video game trying to be scary. Flashes of images, strobe-like effect of the images and screaming. It took me quite a while, but I realized it was telling me something about what it actually is. The first image was, think of a Balrog, except double its height, remove the fire from it, and the wings are made of demon flesh, perpetually dripping blood. The arms look spikier. At seemingly random points along its arms are shards of bone that jut out. And its smile in this form is the most predatory, bloodlustful smile possible across known cryptids. Then I saw a Bible, and the image shatters into dozens of pieces. That in each shard the Bible is positioned to be in the center of each one by reflection. The two images flickered back and forth, but I think I got the meaning. Because of the fragmented religions from that one holy book, the Jersey Devil cannot assume its proper form. And the thing nodded. The migraine eased up considerably, then more images appeared. This time, it is of the Jersey Devils it is described by others, but its shadow is that of its proper form. It walked through a firefight, bullets not affecting it, rockets, machine guns, tank shells, throwing daggers, swords, and axes. Nothing affected it. As I considered a church, it laughed again, and I saw it standing behind a pulpit, apparently giving a sermon. It would grab the bowl of holy water and splash itself in the face while smiling. When I thought the word angel, the shattered Bible image appeared, and I immediately got the meaning. Fragmented religion, diminished beings of power. The migraine was almost gone, but it felt like there was a burr wedged into my skull. The mini devil walked off and returned dragging a large buck behind it with an almost contemptuous ease. It dropped it at my feet and pointed at me. Twice. This was easy to figure out, so I started to prepare some meat, and by the time that I had finished, it returned, dragging a dead Wendigo. It was one of the most tense meals that I have ever been in. I cooked my venison, and it ate the Wendigo meat raw, and it stared at me the entire time. I glanced at the face of its meal, and I am certain that it looked horrified right before it died. After I had my fill, it pointed at me, then the direction of the motel. I started to pack up and it growled. You know how people with a bass in their cars that can make long hair go nuts? Or make people throw up due to the intensity of their vibrations? This was like the exact opposite of that. It was like my bones tried to push my muscles away with spikes for a second. I started to leave and I glanced back, and I saw its last image. At first, it was someone cooking meat over a fire. But instead of me cooking the venison, it was cooking me. I ran out of the woods and I sat in my room for the additional 2 nights, and the only thing of the observable note is that other devil hunters heard a yipping in the woods. And I heard that freaking laughter. One of the few people who I actually got along with died a mysterious death. The death occurred about 7 years ago, and the one thing that seemed out of the ordinary was that her movements around any form or drainage with her house that I was able to observe seemed like there was a very slight outside influence. It would be like there was an invisible bubble that brushed her hands to the side. And as unusual as it was, it never really stood out to me until I read her death report. As it turns out, she was the 37th victim of a series of deaths caused by an unknown being. Case file: drained /civilian number 035. Deceased woman identified as Jennifer Mills was found inside her apartment due to the lack of attendance at her job as a sales representative for a large hardware company. 4 days without communication and calls from family and work colleagues, the police gained entry with access granted by the building supervisor. The skin was found on the bathroom floor. The supervisor was horrified with the remains of her body. And during the investigation, a small journal was found documenting the last 5 weeks of her life, which was at the same time as when she moved in. References to a therapist allowed the police to find out more about the deceased. Interviews with the therapist indicate that the victim was a victim of a subset of trypophobia. Instead of irregular holes, it was drainage pipes specifically regarding house plumbing. She could feel something was trying to reach her through the plumbing. She would have nightmares about the pipes acting like a snake, slithering across her bedroom floor. But when she woke up, nothing would be different. And after 8 months of conversation regarding this, in which she was adamant that she sees a singular eye looking up at her through the drain cover. Oddly, the shower wasn't a problem for her. The doctor recommended that the deceased use a journal to document her feelings, and they would go over it at their weekly sessions together. One thing that was noted was that the fear was only when the deceased was conscious of her proximity to a drain in her home. Since this was a problem that had occurred at her old residence, a move was suggested, in case it was an odd sensation of domicile dissonance. After the move, the sensation seemed to escalate in intensity. For reasons currently unknown, the deceased was not afraid of approaching these drainage areas and would be functional until they see the drain. Then, the fear kicks in. It is highly unusual among phobia sufferers, and the doctor paled at hearing the description of the state of her body. She mentioned she knew of one other therapist who had a near-identical patient in terms of specific phobia subset and state of body after recovery by police. Details were exchanged, and the police resumed their investigation. The initial paperwork triggered automated spy bots within various networks, caught the expression hollowed out, and the morticians took custody over the investigation. From what the morticians were able to uncover, details that they didn't want the police to disseminate. Every case so far, the skin of the person was found within arm's reach of a drain, normally near the bathroom sink. A singular circular wound, smaller than the holes in the drain on a finger, is the only visible indicator of what has happened. No signs of skeletal, nerves, pulmonary, or circulatory systems could be located. And fatty tissue is also missing, as well as the musculature. The obvious action is to check the plumbing. The drain cover is there, but there are no pipes at all. Kitchen, laundry, toilet, and bathroom, all of the plumbing would be gone. And upon further inquiry, the owner of the building or water board company would note that the water for the location has been turned off, and that there was no account that was open for the name of the deceased. The drain cover had no organic matter to indicate the presence of the body matter. Pets would never be affected, and they would sit still by the main entry point and would repeatedly vocalize their discomfort until their death or rescue. A journal entry. It can see me. It knows me. Why can't it stop watching me when I'm in the bathroom? I can almost see it, but part of me is so terrified of the drain. It isn't until I see it. My brain screams at me to run and don't look back, but when I glance away, the fear is gone, like a switch being turned off. At least the dreams have stopped. I just want to know why I keep looking toward the bathroom, as if I was waiting for someone that I hadn't seen in a long time. Just waiting to appear there out of nowhere. I hate this. Case file finished. There is little information that the morticians have, but all of the case files read almost identically. Very few details change. the location of where the body is found, the location of the primary fear source is always where the deceased skin would end up. The complete lack of drain piping, lack of water usage for the location, and the earliest recorded instance was 22 years ago, with all of the noted cases occurring within the United States. The assorted victim seems to be at random. No connections could be found, even with new data located upon additional victims. This would be cause for concern, but given the 100 of case files that I am still going through, indicates that there are likely to be other events as well. I had a visitor the other day when I was taking the initial plunge past the dark web and going into the depths of the deep web. I observed an administrator for a red room was intrigued by my fleeting visit to his site. He and some friends located me by tracking the unique data signature of the custom program that I was using, and they bragged about killing my friend who gave me the program. It was interesting seeing them try to intimidate me. Their smiles hidden behind masks showed that they still suffered from emotional range. The fight was swift, and the muscle brought along were dead at my feet. The brain was incapacitated and secured in the chair that I was in previously. We had a conversation about his desire to kill me and the lengths he took. He was defiant to the end, not that it mattered, and he mentioned that he told other admins that he was tracking the one that got away, but gave no further details. I opened his veins and watched off-screen as he slowly bled to death. He wanted a show for his red room, a reminder of how he was a god with the power to judge the unworthy, and he had the power to decide when a life would end. He apparently was wrong. I smashed the camera after he died, and I contacted the morticians, and they took care of the fools. This is an encounter that I had not so long after getting rid of the lurker of the dark web and his cohorts. However, it took me several days to fully comprehend the event, and also to stop screaming at night. It was about 3 days after the cleanup was finished, and when there were no missing flags matching the descriptions of the deceased, I was asked to look into a hypothetical cryptid. It didn't sound as much a request, but payment for services rendered. When I asked for any information regarding this hypothesis, the only thing known was the name, Leviathan. The resources of the Mortician Network apparently does have some limits, and while they didn't have a submersible on hand, they were owed favors by people of influence. Not exact resources, but close enough for most to consider them as such. However, this favor the Morticians would be calling on was the investigation of this cryptid. A retired naval officer from a country that I have been asked not to identify had reported an awareness of a monster that dwelt below the waves. Official naval protocol worldwide was to squash any reports of information regarding this cryptid, but the officer suffered from what he dubbed narcophobia. He couldn't sleep as a conscious act because he would see it again. Given the sleeping patterns he endures, the credibility of any reliable information is of the most suspect quality. But subsequent investigations found that there were others who also suffered from narcophobia, who also were in their naval equivalents, and all were part of a submarine crew. This particular eccentric witness managed to retain coherency and had become obsessed with identifying this creature. Using his knowledge and engineering skills, he crafted a small submersible that barely registered on sonar, but he needed a witness who was fresh to verify his visions. I was elected to be the witness to a madman's quest for answers. So, I met the man who looked to be redefining the expression sleep deprived, and he led me to his submersible. As I was not involved with submarines or anything nautical while in the army, I couldn't give a good approximation on the size of the vehicle. He showed me how it works in ramblings, and I had to endure multiple times to comprehend. Checklists were followed, food and water rations were verified, and the fuel reserves were confirmed to be accurate, and then we dove underwater. It took us 2 days to get to the area. I heard the same tale told over and over again for the first 14 hours. Human corpses found with giant bite marks and no matchable mouth castings to identify the creature. Shutting the man up permanently was something that I considered frequently, until he turned to me with a big smile and his declaration of how he was going to go to bed now, and then promptly fell asleep. Our location was under the giant plastic island in the Pacific Ocean. I can't really relay the latitude and longitude because I could never figure out how the damn thing was calculated, and for another reason that you will discover shortly. I napped as well for a few hours, and upon waking up, I went to the cockpit and looked around. The retired naval officer was looking down with a grimace. One of the spotlights was locked onto a patch of coral. "Can you see it?" he asked softly. I looked at the location bathed in light for a couple of moments. Then I realized there was something hiding on top of it. Have you ever seen those photos of a man who hides in plain sight by painting himself to look like the background? This is what it was like the camouflage capabilities of the chameleon or some other creatures in the animal kingdom. It was huge, at least 80 feet in length. I had no idea how quick until a large shark got a little too close, and within a blink, and I am being literal, it went from hiding to devouring the shark like the creature Gollum with the live fish in the Lord of the Ring movies. Except, Gollum wasn't dark brown color with 3 arms, one reaching over from behind. The growl this thing emitted while eating shook the submersible. It was happy with the snack. The arm looked like it had been broken and allowed to fix suboptimally, causing bone warping. It had 4 legs and they moved like a spider with half its legs but better balance. "That's it, Leviathan," he whispered happily. Then I looked up and wished that I had met a fully formed Jersey Devil. The recollections were after the fact, but one of the first things I knew was that I screamed for almost 20 minutes without pausing for breath. I had no idea until I was being shaken back into reality. I noticed my throat and face were sore, and apparently I had been screaming. He had tried slapping me in the face a few times to get me to stop, to no avail. And when he asked what was wrong, I just pointed to the aberration above us. It was a gargantuan. It was like massive flesh from which tendrils drooped and spread out. At the end were things, monsters, that defied all natural logic, but they kept shifting their forms like the mass to which they were connected. "What are you looking at?" Words that seemed to resonate within me. I turned to face the man, but that was when I noticed that there was a face in front of the submersible. The flesh seemed to crawl, and the eyes didn't seem empty, just hungry. My mind started to scream, and I just stood there frozen. From the files I have read and things I have seen, there is an acceptance of fate, people who seem to know when it's their time. This thing triggered an oxymoronic sense within me, and this thing was not from this world, but it belongs here. What felt like an ice pick getting slammed into my brain caused a blindingly painful migraine, and when I went to move any part of my face, another ice pick of pain was slammed into me. The only thing I could move without an almost debilitating level of agony was my eyes. I was forced to stare at this face, which seemed to be made of creatures that should have never existed in our world. "What are you looking at?" the voice asked again, and I just stared at this thing's face as it seemed to implode and withdraw back to the rest of its mass, hidden beneath the plastic convergence in the Pacific. "I think we should leave," came a voice that was actually familiar. The last thing I remember was trying to figure out what that thing sounded like and me convulsing. I had always thought being soulless would be the greatest protection against cryptids and the like. The Jersey Devil showed me that some cryptids don't care. The Leviathan showed me that there was far more to this world than I dared to dream. I think I know why most cryptids to do with the ocean are quasi-humanoid. They cannot fully comprehend the thing which apparently triggered a grand mal seizure within me. I was in observation for 6 days, mainly due to the night terrors. It stares at me when I close my eyes. The concerning thing is, it is getting closer whenever I sleep. It turns out that the morticians have been neglecting a section of their case files for me. And while I have archived some of the more known cryptids, I wasn't even aware of this subcategory until I was summoned to an incident scene. In a large field, there was one of those dopey crop circles, but the actual scene was on the edge of a neighboring forest area. I saw a young female dead and scorched by a weapon or energy that I couldn't readily identify. And then I saw an 8-foot tall black-skinned humanoid with a head that was larger than a normal person. Given the color of the skin and the dwindling ambient light, it was not readily apparent on why this entity was there as well. Only complete lack of movement indicated that it was dead too. When it was rolled over, I saw that the nose was almost non-existent and the teeth looked more like fangs. The eye sockets appeared to be a bit lighter than the victim's. And looking at this new corpse, I turned to the attending active mortician. She looked at me and then sighed deeply. She pulled out a large folder, and using the light from my cell phone, I saw the case file name. Alien Event, number 0001, Civilian. I looked at the mortician, and before I could ask the obvious question, she told me the worrying answer. 813, including this incident. The file in my hands was quite thick, thicker than the others, and I have looked at it in the past when I got my hands on the physical file. I offered to help the mortician with this incident, then I would document both. She acquiesced and she gave me the instructions. UV lamps and 2 gurneys. I grabbed the light stands and I carried them over, positioning them in the places indicated. And when they were turned on, the alien corpse glowed softly and the injuries inflicted upon the human corpse glowed as well. Map out the crop circle, came an instruction that I was not expecting. I will need exact measurements of any circles. The area would be good too. Also, total length of the whole thing as well. I paused for a moment and nodded. I had always figured out that the crop circles were just bored teenagers or farmers, which, when you think about it, makes absolutely no sense. Not that they can't be man-made, but the reason for it. What would increased visitors to a farm do in terms of sale of product? I found a headlamp and a measuring tape with a spike on the end, as well as a notebook. I set about my task, and it was simple, but several times I stopped. I was being watched. Something was observing me with an intent that I could not identify. Looking around, I saw nothing the first 3 times. But while measuring the largest circle, I both heard and saw it. Another 8-foot black-skinned humanoid was standing in the cornfield with me. It had partially stepped out of the corn and was partially onto the circle. Its slightly bulbous eyes had no discernible pupil. Its chest moved deeply with its breathing, and we stared at each other for about 40 seconds, and then it walked away. I resumed my measurements, noting them all down, 8 circles in total. 3 were quite large, and while I reported the measurements to the mortician, she nodded along as I read it all out. But she froze after I finished. I immediately looked to see if the other one was back, but there was no sight of it. When I inquired as to her freezing, she explained that there is an arrangement between the organization and the black ones. She then immediately refused to elaborate further. We loaded the bodies in and then drove to a compound. I mentioned that I saw one of the black ones while measuring. Her glance seemed to be concerned, then I had a flash of insight. You autopsied their experiments, and that was all you ever did, but with the corpse of one of them along with an experiment indicates that there is greater trouble than we are aware of, right? Things have changed, and you are unsure of how... I trailed off. How quickly can you conduct an autopsy on the black one? I asked, my gaze peering into the side of the rearview mirrors. Couple hours. Know anything about them biologically? Weaknesses, capabilities, things that might be useful, just in case. Only what is reported in the first case. It's a really long read. So after I wheeled the bodies to the mortuary, I read the case file. Case file. Serial killer, eyeless. Related topics, Black Xenos. It is not often that we directly interfere with the lives of the regular populace, but this was one time where we were forced to act. What is not known is that before Jack the Ripper, there was another active serial killer. However, we made damn sure nobody knew about him. Eyeless, as we would refer to himself, was the only known surviving member of the Xeno experiments. However, since they failed to deliver his corpse, he went completely insane and started to kill people at random. The first victim was a 28-year-old dock worker, Jeremiah Langston. Little was recorded about the abduction of Jeremiah, but the only indication of anything unusual was a deranged scream about how he must be made to see. Jeremiah's body was found with an extra set of 8 eyes inserted into wounds on his corpse. The one thing that would normally set the rumor mill ablaze was the fact that the eyes were still functional. The only other oddity, which was significantly more mundane, was that the skin was rubbed with charcoal, making it completely black. One of the attending policemen was a mortician who paled at the sight, because he didn't see the corpse as human, but as a black Xeno. He offered to escort the corpse to the morgue. But fortunately, the mortician on duty was also one of the morticians as well. They realized the problem, and they needed to do something obscene to divert any mounting public perception of the events. They knew if a killer was putting eyes onto one corpse was unlikely to stop at one, but they couldn't allow this to continue. So the mortician who found the corpse elected to do a 2-fold operation. Search for the killer, they thought, was the obvious one, but they had to divert attention away from this as well. Many are familiar with Jack the Ripper case. Some of you reading this may also be Ripperologists, so Instead of rehashing the case, I will point out that the actual murderer was a mortician who used his police officer skills to create the sensational kills and to get any information about the killer he truly sought. 3 weeks, that is how long it took to find the killer that the mortician sought. Did it never strike you as strange as to why the murder of prostitutes made the headlines in Victorian London? However, the killer himself was unusual. His skin was artificially black like his victims, but he lacked the extraneous eyes his victims had. He had the right holes for the extras, but they were empty. And he turned to the mortician, and he froze. They conversed for a few hours, and it turns out that the Black Xenos would take a human test subject and try to figure out how to get past the death problem. The Xenos would inflict countless experiments on the subject and record everything to do with the many limits of the human body. But this man was another experiment. He was given a serum that modified his body chemistry to a point that the modern term for it is zombie. His brain function is severely limited, but judging by the bruising still evident on his skin, he has been struck by lightning, and it seems to have awakened the higher functions that had been deactivated. The zombie remembered every hellish experiment he was subjected to, and after they neutered most of the higher functionality, he was sent back to Earth. It was hypothesized the lightning strike triggered a chemical reaction that allowed the brain to recover memories of the experiments that the zombie went through. 5 people were killed by this zombie, 5 bodies with eyes that were not connected to any ocular nerves, but still able to move. The zombie explained how he suffered repeated traumas to allow the Black Regalians to understand the limits of human physiology. He was then healed afterwards, and his memories were wiped. Then the process would repeat. After the lightning strike, he would have flashes of memory involving tall black humanoids with large eyes watching him, as he would suffer significant biological trauma. This caused him to freak out and start finding his tormentors, and in the zombie's words, make them see. After reading the case file, I looked over at the mortician. So, you know where the mush corpses come from then? I asked as I walked over to her. She shot me a questioning look. Repeated significant biological trauma, like enduring someone over and over again, or killing them over and over again. I glare at her before I continue. Did you ever wonder what their true intentions were? Just because they say one thing doesn't mean they don't mean something else. For all we know, they treat their guinea pigs, as science shows like they did when they performed surgeries for the rich and elite. Or they use them as props in a science fair. Or they are trying to figure out the most effective ways to kill us, when there are plenty of things that can easily kill us on this planet already, before we even venture into cryptid territory. I ended with a snarl. Or they actually are trying to remove death from us. Slaves that are weak as humans are would be a huge waste of time, unless they couldn't stay dead. Maybe their intentions are honest. If so, why the mush corpses? Someone is trying to send us a message, and if people are too thick to even notice that that is what is going on, it could be a test. I have noticed movement outside of my domicile lately. Normally, I would have explained it as kids trying to mess with me, or gang members trying to prove how tough they are. But given the revelations that I have experienced recently, my opinion is slightly more extraterrestrial. Given the apparent lack of information that I was given, I spoke with a mortician who worked the more recent alien event. I asked where this organization came from. She looked at me and explained that the organization has been around for centuries, but the more formal aspects of working together across the globe came from what is referred to as the event. And as soon as she spoke, she froze like a statue. I looked around, thinking that the alien had infiltrated this place, but I saw nothing. Turning back, she mumbled that she could not discuss this matter further, and then left abruptly. I stayed at the meeting point for a while, rereading the original study of the Dogman experiments. This will be a separate case file upload. I would have done it sooner, but I found about the event. Eventually, I left the meeting point, and as I drove towards my home, my mind wandered. If the interloper was not a black alien, I tried to deduce what it could be. A skinwalker was not likely. The vocal mimicry they possess would have been audibly evident by now. A Wendigo doesn't seem like to me. The Jersey Devil, I hope not, but the size sounds to be bigger and slower. Dogman was a possibility but seems unlikely. Normal dogs raise their heckles at me, so a dogman would likely attack. The rake hasn't crossed the threshold, so its modus operandi doesn't match. A friend of the Red Room admin that I spoke with. That was a slight possibility. He was vocal that I wouldn't get away with this. And so far, he was been proven wrong. No investigation, no police. So far, anyway. People don't scare me, especially after my personal encounters with cryptids. My phone rang, jolting me out of my meditative contemplation. It was the ex-mortician. He sounded worried. He gave me a rendezvous point and a deadline, and I pulled away. And as I left, I saw a crawler emerge from thigh-high grass right next to my vehicle. 2 hours later, I was at one of the many roadside diners in the continental United States. Weapon and permit were double-checked before I entered, and he sat at a booth, his eyes gazing out into a point in the middle distance. He shook his head to bring himself back as I slid in. "You wish to know more about us?" he asked. "I have been working with you for a while now, and it seems there have been some important details that you've missed out. I think it's time I find out the truth about your organization. Would you care to elaborate?" The diner hostess approached and poured a coffee for us. We nodded in gratitude, and when I met her eyes, I saw that haunted look. "Skinwalker. Used to fish for customers every few months. After the 8th victim, we got a hunting party together. They got the cryptid." The former mortician explained plainly. "Answers that question, but then, what is the event?" The flinch was worrying, but I held my ground. Having traveled with this man and the cryptids we have seen, him reacting to anything other than the memory of his last autopsy. For such a pronounced reaction, it was concerning. "You know those creepypastas about Disneyland and missing kids?" he said with a world-weary sigh. 3 centuries before Disneyland, we found items that could not be easily identified. There were no corpses, no signs of foul play, but the objects were strange. It wasn't until recently that we realized what the items were," he said, more to the table than myself. "Lanyards with the names, ages, and addresses of children, as well as a date, but the dates were all after 1958. They are the children that have been or will go missing from any Disney World or Disneyland amusement park. Every child. He looks at me with a tear running down his face. The date when they go missing? The date what's left of them are found. Once we saw the logo for the Walt Disney Company, we knew something was going to happen. Some of our number got hired by the company. They were tireless in their investigation, but it wasn't until 3 years after the first was built that the first body was found, or what was left of her. Bite marks going through her body, but upon closer inspection, there were no splintering or damage to the bones that were chomped through. The cast made of the bite was impossible. Fangs and human teeth all intermingled in the bite. It is also unfathomably large from what we can calculate. Apart from the fact that large pieces of her are missing, there is no evidence of a bite other than the imprint. The ribs we could get were pristine, other than the fact that the rib cage and most of her spine is missing. No splintering or damage, no evidence of surgery. It is impossible, and you know what we have seen in our jobs. Naturally, the company were able to keep the families of those missing quiet. The methods of the morticians are forbidden from discussing. We get the right to examine the remains, but all results have been identical. No extraneous damage, no post-mortem bruising, just dead children, and too many questions. Though we do have a hypothesis, or rather, it is more of a philosophical musing. Ever notice how comedians seem to suffer from depression? It is likely they carry such a darkness within themselves that they try to bring joy and laughter to others. If this truly is the case, what darkness lurks within the amusement parks run by Walt Disney? We sip our coffees as we ponder a question that seems too impossible to be real. I would love to immediately refute these claims, but with the cryptids that I have personally encountered and the cases that I have read, I honestly cannot. "Want a party, handsome?" A voice lures out the front of the diner. I sit up and look around. There are 4 people that should be here. Myself, the former mortician, the hostess, and the cook. No extra vehicles were here on arrival, and no other patrons were here. So, who the hell is trying to proposition us? "Want a party, handsome?" The voice repeats, precisely. A shriek forces me into action. The hostess drops the glass pot of coffee and shrieks again. And as I stand up, I looked outside to see a rotting animal standing up on its hind legs, looking at least 12 feet tall. A skinwalker. "Get them out of here!" I roar. Its gaze shifts between me and the mortician, who is pushing the hostess towards the back. Another voice can barely be heard. I'm not sure, but it sounds like a reply to the skinwalker's hook. "Let's party." This is the song that never ends. Yes, it goes on and on, my friend. Some people started singing it, not knowing what it was, and they'll never stop singing it forever, just because this is the song that never ends. I sang softly while watching the skinwalker out the front. I nodded deliberately at the former mortician, who started singing it. He seemed to hesitate, like he felt foolish for singing a child's song. "Sing the song. These things hunt by fear. The song will distract you, but only if you sing it. Don't stop singing," I tell the hostess slowly. Walking slowly to the serving area, I call the cook. I want you to join us out here and sing that song, I say, not breaking eye contact. Drawing my gun, I stepped away from the serving area. I said, I'm going to distract them. You get to his car and leave. They nodded but kept singing, though the hostess was visibly paler. Pulling out my gun, I decided to draw upon the experience of the Jersey Devil encounter. I needed to feel fear, and nothing on this planet filled me with more fear than that monster. I pointed the gun directly down and fired. The bullet slammed into my foot, and I felt some of the bones break. Bleeding, lame, and feeling scared, hopefully the perfect bait for these predators. Now! I roar, was shooting out the windows near to me, so I can jump out as best as I could. The pain was excruciating, but the presence of the skinwalkers was a very motivating factor. Limping, I made it to the window as the skinwalker at the front walked over to me. Its rotten flesh seemed to absorb the light from the diner. Let's party, came that voice again as I landed outside and grunted in pain. Fear from the Jersey Devil began to exude from me. I forced myself to move fast, but each step on my wounded foot was like standing on a ball of hot lead. Rapid movement from behind me was my only warning. I dove to the side as the skinwalker charged at me, its foot hitting my injured one. I never felt such agony before. I could hear car doors closing. The second skinwalker was visible now. As it crawled through the window, its rotten meat seemed to hang from the bones as it stared toward me. Its grin stretched beyond the realm nature indicated on the head that it currently had. Its jaw opened, and I could hear it replicate a scream of terror. I started to run, but the damage to my foot slowed me down. The car engine revved somewhere in the parking lot. I could hear the tires squeal in protest as the former mortician and hostess raced to safety. Limping as fast as I could, I saw the second skinwalker emerge from the cafe. It was even longer than the first. I briefly considered how my mind would have reacted to these unnatural monstrosities if I hadn't encountered the Leviathan. Something shifts in the atmosphere when my mind brushes against that memory. The predatory beast pause. They glance at each other. Then they charge at me. Fear is no longer useful. It has served its purpose. What I need is fury. White, cold fury. I charge at the aberrations and roll under the swiping claws of the closest creature. Pushing off of my wounded foot, I spring up and I let the pain fuel me with adrenaline. Fire is a good weapon against the supernatural, and while I cannot throw it, I pray this diner has gas stoves. Screeches that threaten to scratch my eardrums to shreds burst forth from the ravenous maws. Scrambling as they follow, I dive through the serving window. Crashing to the ground, I looked up and see the stoves are gas. Clawing my way up, while the skinwalkers stalk toward me, I pull at the stove. And with a grunt, I can feel it start to give. Then I almost hit my head on the stove. I turn on the valves, gas hissing away, and I grab 2 knives while I slip my gun into my holster. Control. That word is my anchor. And while the pain fills me with adrenaline, one stupid mistake would get me killed. I need to stay in control, but angry enough to give my attacks more power. They stalk a different side of the kitchen island towards me, skilled and trained predatory tactics. I throw 1 knife at the furthest monster, but the blade doesn't get much purchase against the rotten flesh. I back up to the door and I can see them smiling at me. Patience, not a common mental trait of monsters. And by now, I am almost at the door and they are blocking my view of the kitchen. I can't run. They will catch me in a heartbeat, or whenever they want to, and I can't shoot the oven to trigger a spark and hopefully an explosion. But I do see a microwave. I draw a fire 3 shots. The first misses. The second one connects and sparks fly from the electronic device. I don't hear the third shot due to the explosion and the screeching. The shockwave throws me out to the doorway and I land on the asphalt. The screeching takes a higher pitch as I roll over and look at the 2 skinwalkers who are still standing and walking towards me. I force myself up and I start to limp into the forest. I can hear them stalk towards me and I am too sore to continue fighting. Glancing back as I make my way through the forest, I can see their engulfed bodies. A loud crack causes me to flinch, and turning around, I only see one walking flaming corpse, and that too crashes to the ground. A piercing howl seems to actually tear the night sky apart. Then silence returns. I eventually made it to the main road where I met a strike teams dispatched by the morticians. I debriefed them while they took me to a trusted vet. I apologize for the delayed update, but I have been trying to recover. But my dreams feature those 2 skinwalkers with heightened prevalence. While recuperating from the self-inflicted gunshot wound, I decided to resume my actual duties as an archivist for the Mortician Network. I noticed an oddly assortment of cases spread across multiple cities, each with varying numbers in each location. Case File: Sewer Inhabitant, NYC 01386. Preliminary details are small due to what was left of the body outside a storm sewer grate on the outskirts of Manhattan. Most of her right hand bearing telltale signs of tattoos, and a tan are the immediate identifying features. No rings adorn the hand, and the fingerprints have turned up nothing on any criminal database. It is likely that this is one of the many missing homeless people in New York City. However, due to the lack of a body or location where the victim was last seen, any further detail is currently speculation unless we ask the entire homeless population if the photograph of this hand looks familiar. Body part was found on June 2, 2010. Case File: Sewer Inhabitant, NYC 0068. Preliminary details are more substantial as a large part of the torso and upper thighs were relatively undamaged when removed from a sewer junction when discovered. Autopsy indicates the presence of claws and sharpened fangs were used to remove the flesh from the bone. Traces amounts of DNA indicate a human variation. DNA mapping indicates that this variant is smaller than the average human. The skin would be scaly like a lizard, as the creature is cold-blooded. No mappable bone structure, but hardened cartilage is theorized to allow movement. The eyes seem to allow vision in low or no light, with an aversion to powerful light. Clothing remnants indicate that this was a subcontractor for the city. Partial tattoos allowed for easier identification as a reformed gang member. The victim was reported as being missing for approximately 3 weeks, in comparison to the estimated time of death. Partial data recovery from destroyed cellular phone have the estimated date and time of death. Vague witness reports indicate heightened noise pollution from the sewer. One witness who was walking along the street on the same day of death advised that there was no ambient noise from any animals in the area. While motor vehicles could be audibly identified, there were no birds chirping or insect background noise. No other abnormalities were noticed by the witness. Case file: Sewer Inhabitant, Paris, number 0013. Mauled body of an urban explorer found outside an entrance to the Parisian sewer system. No traces of DNA, despite the evidence of the similar wounds found on other victims killed in sewer systems around the world. Given the likelihood this urban explorer was originally delving into the Paris catacombs, no further investigation is to occur. When I started to look after case files pertaining to the Parisian catacombs, the only comments regarding these were, "Please refer to the hard copies locked away in a safe place." There are over 913 case files with dates going back decades. I will be speaking with the morticians once I have healed up more. The hostess from the bar is seeing one of the therapists who have dealt with those who survived an encounter with the paranormal, as she was really traumatized with the situation. A situation I can understand since encountering the Jersey Devil. There was a few camera feeds of maintenance workers going into the sewer systems. Most are like the end of the Blair Witch, the potential to be shocking, but ultimately a giant anticlimax. But one did catch my attention, not from a maintenance worker, but by a wealthy urban explorer who spent a significant amount on his gear, including a wireless transmitter that could penetrate the ground well enough to send the footage to a black box recording device. This included audio as well, and I will include a transcription of the relevant audio. Case file: Sewer Inhabitant, Detroit, number 01499. Blood-stained camera and shattered pieces of head found outside a storm sewer entry point. Camera appears to be a GoPro with aftermarket antenna modifications to allow greater transmission power and clarity. Network tracing allowed the investigators to locate a black box setup at home of a citizen in the socio-economic bracket of the upper class. Name has been redacted due to the complicated history this family has with the paranormal. Owner of the camera was reported as missing, and the remains were found 3 weeks after the initial complaint. The official answer given to the family is that the child was kidnapped and killed via a red room on the dark web. Footage has been created to emulate this, should they ever ask to see the footage. The recording was examined and copied to the corresponding case file. Video and audio clip. The initial start is a voiceover of the urban explorer introducing himself with his Urbex handle. He states that he wanted to explore the storm sewers around Detroit because he believes that it will be just like the video game series Infamous of the PlayStation consoles. He approaches a large intake and enters. He describes the surprising amount of research that he did into this, and he comments on past excursions that he conducted. He walks for about 15 minutes before he freezes. Audio. Did you hear that? Sounds like something was scratching the wall. Video. The urbexer looks behind him slowly, the headlight revealing nothing in the corridor behind him. Turning back, he doesn't seem to notice that there is something ahead which draws further into the darkness. Judging by the lack of commentary from the urbexer, it seems unlikely that he did not see the creature. Using the alternate methods that were also being recorded due to the high-quality camera, night vision reveals the presence of 3 short humanoids with very long arms and very short legs. As the urbexer creeps forward, the three creatures move backwards, but the movement seems odd, more fluid than normal. Audio. Well, I hope I don't run into any mole people down here. A mole person is a derogatory term used to describe people who live underground. Probably better than Morlock from the Time Machine, though. Video. He explores a little further and arrives at an intersection. Periodic checking of the night vision mode reveals that the sewer inhabitants split up at the intersection. The only likely safe path is for him to return home, but he didn't seem to be aware. He looks down each corridor and he is silent again. He seems to be trying to listen for something. Audio. In the distance, water drips. There is no other ambient noise other than the breathing of the urbexer. Then, there is a high-pitched shriek. Video and audio. The urbexer swears and charges straight ahead. His panting echoes off the walls around him. He looks back, and in the bouncing headlight, he can see the sewer inhabitants. He turns to face in front of him, but he slams into a wall that he didn't see, and he crashes heavily to the ground. There is no movement from the camera, and I suspect that he knocked himself out. However, the video shows him trying to move, and a soft groan was just drowned out by the scrabbling of claws on the ground. He rolls over to his back and then starts to sit up. The inhabitants approach, and the light shining off their eyes. The way the arms bend indicate that the arms are cartilage-based, rather than a skeletal system. A swipe from an arm of an inhabitant knocks the light and the camera off the urbexer's head. Contrary to popular horror tropes, the camera doesn't land in a way that shows the carnage that is audible. The screams last for approximately 39 minutes before the assumed death of the urbexer. The camera records for another several hours before powering off. It is unknown how the camera appeared at the entrance where it was located. As I went through the hundreds of cases from around the world, including Russia, which is unusual as they never shared any case files that I had seen, I became concerned about what these creatures were, other than man-eaters. Their movement, from what I could see, were weirdly fluid, and the skeletal structure, as previously mentioned, seemed to be more focused on cartilage than actual bone. The only thing that struck me as off in all of these cases were the ones based in Paris. 5 recorded deaths with autopsies performed on what was left, but there were a disconcerting amount of references to the Parisian catacombs and very empathetic warnings to stay away. Since I got a regular visitor in the form of a retired mortician, I decided to being it up with him when I next saw him. Closing down my connection to the dark web, I hear a knock on my door. As I answer it, I notice something very unusual. There is no white noise at all, no hum of electronics or anything like that. As I opened the door, I saw no one until I turned around. A black Rigelian stood there, slightly hunched over and looking directly at me. Seeing the Rigelian in front of me, I was taken aback. I certainly was not expecting a member of an alien race that does experiments on humans to be in my home. It stands there like in those movies, weight mainly on one leg, as if peering around a corner, except he is in my hallway. "Why are you here?" I asked it. "Hello," it said uncertainly. I repeated the question, and it paused for a moment and said, "Hello, I am sorry," it said before I could respond. This put me on defensive, as these seemed to be the reason for the mushed corpses. Having a dialogue, even on this unusual, seemed to hold my interest for my health and good standing. Next thing I know, I am getting flashes in my mind, like someone is somehow physically slamming a slideshow into my mind. Trees, but not the ones I expected to see. Rainforest, perhaps. Another image. This one is more chaotic. Flashes of movement, barely there glimpses of what I believe are faces. More images of something, likely in the woods. Sounds can be heard. Screaming, begging, mercy is being requested, whimpering. What can be understated as a migraine decides to set up a blog dancing competition with a global supply of elephants on my brain would cause a quieter noise than the pounding my head is forcing me to endure. I see black Regalians standing around, looking over their shoulder with long coats on. They are smiling, for a lack of a better word, though it seems more leering. This is an undercurrent of an emotion that I cannot quite comprehend. "Sorry," it says again. I still cannot figure out what it's trying to convey. Another flood of images, half-man monster creatures in bad makeup running around a movie set. Dr. Morrow. Then it clicks. You turned humans into monsters, didn't you?" I whisper. "Me, no. Others, yes," it stated simply. I can feel a deep sense of violation at this statement. No, not the statement. The complete lack of inflection. It didn't feel bad for what the others did to another race. But then I remember that I was educated on empathy. Any damage I incurred, regardless of intent, my parents would sit me down and discuss it with me in great detail. My intentions towards the objects were the occasional house pet whose corpse they found. After the sixth cat, I asked why they did this, and they explained that due to my lack of emotions, they came to understand that I do not understand the emotional impact of my actions. They told me how other people would view my actions and see me as a monster. Well, my intention was never to commit harm to another person. When the cat annoyed me too much, I would kill it. Perhaps this alien is like me. No emotional awareness. While part of me still burned at the thought of their actions, I decided to understand the intent. Why? What would cause you to turn the humans you get into monsters? I asked. Images flood into my mind, but these were very familiar. It was Sid's bedroom in Toy Story. The focus was on Sid causing harm to the toys with malicious glee. And then they see him put them back together in ways he found entertaining. We are mere playthings to them, toys to pull apart and put back together however they want. Bile rises in my throat and I force it back down. That ember of rage was roaring into an inferno. I wanted to slam my fist into that Rigelian over and over again until I turned into a black smear on my carpet. When I stood up, after the visions drove me to my knees, it took a step back. It recognized the danger it was in. Its hands were lifted slightly, like a person would do to try and placate the predator. Then, the emotions were gone. You are going to tell us how many you turned and into what. Then you will tell us why you made contact with me, I declared in a whisper. My phone rang, and I answered it. The ex-mortician greeted me and wanted to visit. Now would be a perfect time, and bring a voice recorder. There's a conversation we need to have, I say, my eyes fixed on the regalian. The rage hadn't truly dissipated, but it wasn't trying to overtake my conscious action. What human foods can you consume safely? French toast, it said, while giving me an image of a French toast in my head. Any human liquids? Water. You seem to be aware of some societal protocols. I expect you will be following along, as it is not a direct violation of your own, I said as I walked to the kitchen. 25 minutes later, I had finished making the French toast and was carrying it back to the black regalian and a stunned ex-mortician who were at my dining table. The recorder was turned on as we started our meal. What monsters did you create? The ex-mortician asked, his eyes glancing at me once to see if he had permission to speak. Vampire, Therian, Arachne, Minotaur, Satyr. Animal-headed human from place with lots of sand. Others, mainly humanish ones. Others were too difficult and died. Arachne? From ancient Greek lore, you turned a human woman into a spider? Woman with no limbs, broken toy when we found her, gave her twice as many limbs, removed tongue to stop loud noises. The ex-mortician and I froze in shock at this. Not much left to do to finish, it said simply. Why? The ex-mortician asked. I closed my eyes and explained my conversation with my guest before he called. The ex-mortician started to shake with rage. I glared at him and told him to calm down, and he started to yell at me when I pointed out two obvious facts. The first fact, that this black regalian has taken the time to study our culture more to facilitate communications, to confess the actions of his people. The second fact was he clearly wanted to warn us about something, because there would be no other reason for him to break into my house for no reason. Why are you here? Why have you come to me? As I tried to understand emotions and the inflections of people used to express them, there are things you notice. The pause before someone drops a huge truth would shake the worldview of the listeners. I am not sure if it's learned behavior the regalian picked up during its consumption of media, or if it performed it instinctively. You came to warn us. Your people are trying to what? Enslave humanity? No, not enslave, so much as change us into monsters of our fiction, because you think that it would be fun. I ask, my mouth slightly agape. It looks at me and then nods. They were going to release the ones you don't know about against you all. You likely wouldn't live too long. I can't help, I say after a long pause. I had considered it, but given my recent injury and the archiving still ahead of me, it would be irresponsible for me to go. You need a warrior, not a soldier, but a natural-born warrior. If you can find one who would be suitable, I will help convince them. But this is not my war. I have been dragged into the cryptids. native to this planet. It walks out of the lounge and into the hallway, closing the door behind it. I walk to the door and I pull it open, revealing the hallway that it had stepped into and nothing else. The ex-mortician steps up next to me and mutter in surprise that the regalian is no longer there, and I let the door swing close and I step away. "You're really going to do nothing?" he asked softly. "I have already explained why I'm not the right choice. I'm not going to repeat myself," I answered calmly. Sitting at my small dining table, I wonder how it knew how to find me. The ex-mortician walked over, and carefully, he watched me as I sat there for a few minutes. "So, did you come over for a reason in particular?" I asked. "Look, you injured yourself to lure those skinwalkers away. I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he answered. "I'll be fine. I was just going to archive some more cases. Hopefully have a little less action in my life for a while," I say as I grab my laptop, my coffee, and a few other implements. "What case files are you going to be looking at this time?" the ex-mortician called out. "Mimics, or suspected mimics." "Ooh, those can be messy." Case file: Mimic confirmed, elevator, Tokyo, Japan. In the month of November, a confirmed mimic was located in an apartment building in Tokyo, Japan. The case that brought this to the attention of the network was the 11th confirmed missing person involving a tenant at this building. A young male, aged 24 years old, was seen entering the elevator, and he was not seen since. An investigating officer noted the other missing people and spoke his intentions to a private investigator known to investigate the unusual. This PI is a known network operative. He was able to get the suspected elevator shut down for a period of 3 days under the guise of maintenance. The first day was spent on research and tracking down the footage involving the other victims, and he was able to locate the corresponding shaft. On the second day, he confirmed the presence of a mimic copying an elevator car. Since the mimic had recently fed, it wasn't active in its consumption. However, as the personal investigator suspected a mimic's involvement, he was able to quickly confirm it. And that night, he used an accelerant infused with metallic shards and a lighter to remove the mimic seed. He then entered the shaft and killed the mimic nest, which was located at the top of the elevator shaft, and the damage caused to the actual elevator engine at the top was approximately 20 million yen. The corpses were never recovered. Case file: Mimic confirmed, escalator, Colorado, USA. At an abandoned shopping mall located in the state of Colorado, urban explorers were searching through the complex. One had split off from the group and was walking along the escalator. The attached video footage located on the Mortician's network showed what happened. The young explorer was walking around until they reached about 1/3 of the way along. Suddenly, they ceased walking, though it was evident that they were trying to move. As they looked around, they started to resume a forward motion, as if the escalator was working again. When they noticed the unusual activity, they looked ahead at what appeared to be a mouth that looked like the combination of a sarlacc from the Star Wars setting and a Venus flytrap. The explorers started yelling loudly, but none of the others seemed to notice, and the explorer was consumed slowly. While the death was a tragedy, there were two things of note regarding this case. The complex had no active utilities at all, so how the security camera was working is relatively unknown. Also, 5 hours after the explorer vanished, the mall was burned to the ground, and the fire service was unable to locate anything relating to arson or anything that could cause the mall to be burned to ash. So this part of the case file is still active. Case file: Mimic suspected, elevator, China. This information was smuggled out of mainland China by an operative who passed away shortly after delivery. 300 video clips were on the thumb drive, all of them almost identical in footage. A different person was seen in each video file, but they were all the only one on a seemingly malfunctioning elevator, and they all got stuck and through machinations that are unknown. All of their heads were removed violently. Accompanying text files indicate that there was never any blood or bodies found in any of the kill sites, and given the strict information control that the Chinese government has over the people, there is no way that we can communicate with our network resources over there, as they are still hunting for the network in the deep web. There is a smaller text file which indicates that mimics might be evolving to more mobile forms. Abandoned cars on the side of the road seems to be a common suspicion of mimics. Also, theories or suspicions that they are working with other cryptids. After disconnecting my laptop from the deep web, I stand up and stretch. There was a lot of information to go through, and sitting hunched over my computer took a toll. As I finished my stretch, I noticed something concerning. Shadows seems to be darker. Light in general seems to be slowly fading away. So grabbing my pistol, I carefully make my way until I discover the problem. The ex-mortician sits next to a cryptid that I never expected to see. Sitting there like a gangly lupin, the rake sits there. Its pale skin almost seems to glow. Its empty eyes stare at me, and I hear a scratchy voice speak in my mind. Threat. I aim my weapon at the cryptid when the ex-mortician shakes his head. He is my friend. He is the rake. He struggles to speak, like his words are escaping quicksand. What brings you here? I ask. Help, it replies verbally. This will be my final case, archival or otherwise. The investigation I have conducted when I arrived to the forest has led me to the foregone conclusion that I will never be able to return to my home or the mortician's network, except as another case file. I would like to thank everyone who has enjoyed my work, and I hope that someone else is able to find that network, as there is still so much more to archive, and I appreciate the interest in my work. As I mentioned earlier, the ex-mortician had become a vassal of the rake that has appeared in my apartment. I grabbed my survival gear as the rake has asked for help, a sentence I never thought that I would have to write. The rake disappeared, but I was still aware of its presence, like a spike thrust into my skull. The ex-mortician and I drove to a national forest, following the blur that was the rake as it herded my driving to where it wanted. Retrieving my gear I collected, I start my slow hike through the woods, the rake my guide. It didn't like me being slow, but given that I was still recovering from my gunshot there, speed was not a factor that I could contribute to for long stretches of time. The ex-mortician was silent throughout this entire enterprise, which wasn't a shock to me. For miles, we trekked through the woods, which had an odd sense to them. It was like being wrapped in a blanket of warmth and stinging nettles. Pleasant, but painful. As we got closer to where the rake was leading us, I stopped. I remember being briefly stationed in a US base secreted within the Russian wilderness. It was only for a few weeks, but I could barely remember it, and now I know why. The US base was small, barely bigger than the base that was overrun, possibly by doppelgangers. Small number of personnel meant fewer resources and lower amounts of equipment, which further equates to less chance of being spotted. But what the Pentagon failed to take into consideration was the presence of other beings of this planet, whose existence is either redacted, blatantly disregarded, or met with dismissive hostility. As documented in my earlier case files, we are not alone on this planet, from known cryptids to whatever did that to the town centuries ago. But most folklore is restricted to particular regions of the world, or so we have been led to believe. One of the more infamous cryptids or monsters of folklore in Russia is Baba Yaga, the Russian version of Witch in the Woods. Whether she will help or hinder are based on factors that I will never figure out. But looking at what I was seeing in front of me in a national forest in the USA, I remembered my encounter with Baba Yaga in Russia, including its walking house on bird legs. I was on routine patrol within 12 hours of my arrival at the Russian forward scouting base. Patrols were random and executed by one person. I was patrolling at 04:19 when it arrived. I felt a shift in the forest, but at that time was not aware of the Baba Yaga who ruled the forest we were in. I was 12 minutes into my patrol when I walked out of a mist that appeared out of nowhere. The only other thing of note at that time was I had a resounding headache, but I persevered. This house descended towards me slowly, and I became aware of the attention that I was being burdened with. The legs crouched down, and the door opened when it got low enough, and a woman stood there, her features seeming to shift like a mirage. The features went from attractive to repulsive, but they never seemed to settle. All it seemed to do was compound my headache. Baba Yaga greeted me and bade me to enter her hut. While my commanding officer likely would have disagreed with me, I hoped the change of scenery would diminish my pounding head. I agreed that I would, but I wasn't able to step up to the hut as it was still a good 15 feet in the air. "Take the stairs," was the response as a staircase appeared before me. Carefully, I strode up and entered this hut. Once crossing the threshold, my headache was gone, and I thanked the woman for her hospitality. She thanked me for the courtesy, saying that I was a nice young man. Then the side of me that I had under control since a child had to rise up. It was something that I had made myself aware of, so I could maintain control. But here it was, like a cobra, poised to strike. The woman didn't seem to pay any mind as I fought for my control of my own body. That part that I had kept controlled wanted to shoot the woman, but I was able to keep control. And as soon as I ejected the magazine and thrust my weapon away, she turned to me and smiled. I was suddenly very aware of the predicament that I had blundered into. She seemed to notice and noted that I was a smart boy. Then her eyes seemed to soften. "But a broken boy too," she said softly. She stepped towards me then hissed, "Empty boy, void stricken." Next thing, I was consciously aware that I was being shipped off home. But the one thing I did overhear before I left was there was another set of incomplete stairs in the woods. And now, I see another set of incomplete stairs in this forest, and what is worse is I see a chicken-legged hut, dead. As I approach the legs, I can see that they are wooden, and somehow blood was oozing from the wounds inflicted upon them. Walking the 30 feet to get to the capsized hut, I can see military uniforms, but the creatures in them are not human. Dogmen, German shepherds and a couple of bloodhounds by the looks, and they were dead. There was a mass of grey flesh next to which stood the rake. It looked at me, and I felt a crushing sadness within me. Too late. Mistress dead. It sounded within my head. It walked up to the ex-mortician and with a casual swipe of its claws, sliced his stomach wide open. He slumped to the ground and just lay there as the rake ate him. The dogmen were wearing military dog tags, but I didn't recognize the names. I was unsure of what to do or if the rake would eat me next. Suddenly, a loud crashing noise ripped through the air, and the hut had flipped upside down and was sinking into the ground, as was the mass that must have been the Baba Yaga. The staircase shuddered for a moment before collapsing and rebuilding itself upside down. I remember listening to the encounters people have had with the stairs in the forest, or how they feel creeped out by them, or the superstition surrounding them. Then I knew. Baba Yaga was here and brought her sisters with her. They lived within the hundreds of miles of forest. Some of those cryptid encounters were likely victims of Baba Yaga who had insulted them. So, the Baba Yaga sought retribution. They would curse those humans and force them to live how they were changed. Then, I turned to the rake. "That is how you came to be, isn't it? You each belong to the Baba Yaga, like a faithful companion," I say, as I turned to the rake as it finished consuming. It nodded once and stared at me. A thudding noise boomed in the distance, and it is starting to come closer. Another Baba Yaga is coming to see her fallen sister. I doubt the rake will let me leave. So like I said, this is my final archive. I appreciated the enormity of the task that once laid before me, but I do not think that I will be able to return to it. So as what is likely my final request, if you can, please find the Mortician's network and continue what was once my task.
Automated message.
Hello, Harold. If you are reading this, I am either dead or have been missing for over 7 months. As you had backdoor access into the program that I use for browsing the deep web, I figure that you have read into my case files. I am sorry that I was unable to inform you of this, but I think you will understand why I decided not to inform you. But since this is likely my last report, this will be more observation than fact, but the spiderweb of deceit in regards to cryptids and related fatalities is surprising from what I have been able to ascertain. Something I have noticed is 4chan, regarded in a non-positive light. I find it unusual that some of the monsters were created on that site. Making a monster is how it was referred to, and given the photos they apparently photoshopped and otherwise manipulated, those images are not as doctored as we have been led to believe. The creatures are actually there, but because they doctor over the photo subject, it indicates that the creature is a creation. The reason why I find this odd is the fact that 4chan has been cited as a resource for mainstream for larger news stories. However, as previously referenced, 4chan is not that reputable, but the elevation the website has gained when used as a reference point, it struck me as odd, unless it is part of a misdirection campaign, which is what I theorize. Missing 411 is intriguing as there is some correlation between bodies examined and cases referenced, but there doesn't seem to be anyone trying to shut it down, though that is more likely due to internet discourse. But the few attempts to besmirch the person who is following these cases have not been very successful. I am well aware of how this sounds, like a conspiracy dreamed up by people with low IQs and a hidden puppet complex. But there is one other piece of this puzzle: fear. It is easier to mischaracterize these as animal attacks, or they just wandered off, any excuse to hand-wave the unusual or downright bizarre. Local papers won't admit that search and rescue officers have no clue despite following the evidence because the outcome doesn't work. They follow the tracks, the logical progressions and logic, but no clues or conclusions are encountered. As you can reasonably conclude, there are a fair amount of missing 411 bodies that have been autopsied and cataloged, and as my final archival entry, I will include 2 below, one with cryptid involvement and the other just unexplainable. 411 corpse, confirmed cryptid involvement. In 1938, the individual involved disappeared from a family excursion through a location that is not to be disclosed given the nature of the cryptid involved. After the requisite searches, the individual was deemed lost, though the family never gave up hope. What is not known to the family is that a dryad abducted the individual. The boy would never be found alive. In 1996, a hiker with ties to the morticians stumbles upon the body of a missing individual. Dryads capture young children, though typically they have another cryptid to do the abducting for them. That does not seem to be the case in this situation, though. The individual did not age a single day, even after death. The capabilities of dryads are not very well known, as encounters with them are exceedingly rare. However, there is a record of an autopsy conducted on a dryad. Cryptid autopsy. Dryad. Age unknown. Name unknown. The specimen is measured at 5 feet and 6 inches in height. Her complexion appears tan, but closer inspection indicates that the skin is actually very fine bark, which is sturdier than normal tree bark. Incisions with regular equipment is virtually impossible, and typical cryptid countermeasures fail to inflict any impact. Woodworking equipment was brought in, and a rudimentary autopsy was given, but the equipment required frequent repairs due to overheating of the engines or blunting of the blades involved. And while the specimen is humanoid, the weight is significantly higher than the originally suspected. 438 pounds of mass compressed into an athletic build. No digestive organs could be discerned, but analysis of the hair fibers indicates some form of moss which gives way to a photosynthesis style of nourishment. Musculature almost seems human, except appears to be constructed of wood. It is nearly impossible to gauge physical capabilities, as at the time of death, the wood appears to have hardened. No skeletal system is traditionally seen, though some form of human exoskeleton can be deduced from thin but extremely durable branches throughout the sample's body. With no digestive tract, it is impossible to deduce if these cryptids require other form of nutrition or if they eat for any other reason. The discovery of this sample was borderline miraculous. A solo hiker happened to overhear a Gaelic phrase being recited where the body was discovered. Intrigued at recognizing that language, but confused as to the intent, the hiker approached and saw the sample resting on what is hypothesized to be a stone cairn. The hiker tried to administer first aid, but found the skin and musculature too rigid to budge. The weight was far more than what the hiker was prepared to contend with, so they made a call via satellite phone. Anomalous phrases triggered the mortician protocol, and an asset was dispatched from the local area to assist the hiker. During the statement given, the Scottish tourist explained that they heard a Gaelic phrase being repeated in a slow tone. Wood for life, youth from the young. It struck the hiker as some odd druid phrase, but wasn't able to conclude to any solid connection. The asset reported that he felt observed while he moved the body himself to a mortician transport after the hiker gave his statement. 411 body. Suspected cryptid involvement. Anomalous behavior confirmed. This one is odd for a fair amount of reasons. While the identity wasn't initially confirmed, the body was able to provide answers that could be verified through other means. The body was seen prone in a clearing during another SNR operation. The person who located the body reported it to his quadrant supervisor. The regular mortician who conducted the autopsy of the body, who was not the intended target, noted a complete lack of human organs, along with no apparent cause of death. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except for the lack of brains, heart, liver, and lungs. No signs of deterioration and no indications of forced removal. The organs were simply not there. It wasn't until the coroner mused aloud to the identity of the corpse that it sat up, suspecting this may have been another involuntary reaction. The doctor seemed to sense something odd about the situation. It just didn't feel right. The coroner asked one question to the corpse before contacting the network. "Do you know how you died?" The corpse nodded in response. Once the coroners took over the case with an appropriate dummy corpse, the coroner determined that it could only answer close questions. Over several hours, the following information was obtained. This person went missing in 1791. He was with friends and family. He was not from the woods where his body was found. He was called away by something. He knows he has a name, but he does not know what it is anymore. He was Native American. He knew that his friends and family were looking for him, but he was unable to reach out to them. He does not know why that was. He doesn't remember eating after his disappearance, and he has not been able to contact any other human being until his body was allowed to be recovered. He knows that something made him into what he currently is, but he is not able to identify it. After the long interview, this body was walked slowly to the 411 wing and placed with the 43 other bodies to stand there until further questioning. I am so sorry that I was no longer able to provide further additions to my archival work, So this is my way of passing the baton. Whether you decide to pick it up, Harold, it is entirely up to you. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.